memory that's bugging you that you want to concern or anything about that? No? Did everybody do well on the homework? There's just one question. Who's got the answer? Let's see if it's right.
What's the question?
St. Paul, 1971.
Yes, all right, that's it. So the question was, when and where did the domestic violence movement start? And it's in St. Paul, Minnesota in 1971 is the answer. So make sure you guys have that right down, because that might be on your quiz at the final end.
It was right across the...
Yep. Yeah. So tonight, I have invited our community education and prevention team to come and present on diving into domestic violence 101, stuff like that, gender roles, attitudes towards gender roles in society. And so you guys can introduce yourself. Trisha, well, I'll do a short introduction. Trisha and Emily from last time, so they'll do that. And I'm gonna let them take it away, and I'm gonna come around and get the IDs for the Nevada Child Abuse Registry. If you have them today, cool. If you don't, it's all right. All right? Cool.
I was just going to say, it's really interesting. You wonder, perception creating reality. Is this whole thing with Rob Porter? Have you heard about it to the news?
Rob Porter?
Rob Porter's the assistant to John Kelly in the White House, and
Okay.
he's just resigned with 2 domestic violence abuses. It reports to the FBI, up to the president, everybody, and they all ignored it. And then the wife actually posted the picture of her black eye, and then all of a sudden, so really the cover-up is probably almost as bad as what he had done. But it's just interesting how the stuff is all...
Yeah, it all comes out. That is very interesting. We can talk about that today for sure. Yep. All right, cool. So if you have your ID, just raise your hand and let me know, and I'll come by and pick it up, okay? Cool, and I'll go make copies. Well, first of all, I have to let you guys fill this out. Yes, driver's license. That's okay.
Are we good to start?
Yes.
Okay, so I am Trisha, this is Emily, wrote our names up there. If you all have your name cards, it would help us as well if you could put them out. From last time you all met on Tuesday, you were asking about the statistics. So we actually didn't have our 16-17 statistics compiled yet. This is what is compiled of them, so you'll see there's a couple like X's that aren't numbers quite yet, but the main numbers are on there of community members that we've served and what their victimization was. So you have an idea of that. Also, it's 16-17 because we're on a different fiscal year, and that's how we do our statistics too. So we're July 1st through June 30th. That's our year that we compile everything for. So that's why it's 16-17. It's not actually a 2-year period, it's a 1-year period. So those are for you all to keep if anyone has any questions. So I'm going to tell you about our community education and prevention program. And if you notice, we have a line on our stats sheet too. So we provided community and prevention education to 4,795 individuals in a year. As well as we did 166 sessions of youth groups with 165 students. So that's a lot. If you think about, this is like one presentation, doing a large amount of those on almost a daily basis in our program. So within the community education and prevention program, we have 5 staff. You've met, I think, only 2 of us so far. So Eileen, Cassie, and Kate, you will also meet at other times. They're going to come and present as well. We're housed in our Incline office, yet we work in all of North Lake Tahoe and Truckee, mostly in the schools. So our school-based programming is, we do classroom education for all students in K through high school. And we do any kind of violence prevention education. So we don't just talk about domestic violence or sexual assault, we talk about bullying, stranger awareness, internet safety, all kinds of topics, suicide prevention at times, any kind of violence prevention is what we're there covering. And so theoretically, every student in all of North Lake Tahoe and Truckee should see us in their classroom at least once every year. So pretty consistently. But in addition to that, we're also doing youth empowerment groups, and those are groups that we go in with 1 or 2 facilitators for 10 weeks with the same students. So we meet with the same students once a week. And those students are referred not because they have been a victim of abuse, but because they're just seen as at risk. But because we're prevention, we don't have the requirement of working with victims and survivors. We can work with anyone because we're trying to prevent abuse from happening. So the youth in our groups could be referred for any, actually we do some like leadership type groups as well. So counselors and teachers might refer someone they see as like a leader or peer mentor, but it could also be someone who's being bullied, someone who is a bully, someone who's maybe parents are going through a divorce and they're having a hard time with it. Maybe there's been a death in their family. It can really be any reason that that they've been referred to that group. And we meet for about an hour a week with them. We always bring food, and we like to end our groups with like a pizza party or something like that. So it's a good way to work with a small group of students, build rapport with them. I'm telling you a bit about this because this is a volunteer opportunity that you have once you complete. If anyone would be interested in like co-facilitating a group with one of our staff for a 10-week program, that would be an option for volunteering with us. In addition to that, we also do leadership clubs at Truckee High School and North Tahoe High School. There are 2 separate grants that we receive funding for, so they look very different. Our Truckee High group leadership club, they're working towards ending domestic and sexual violence, creating awareness within the Truckee High School, and the group is also taking it out into the community. So their goal is to actually engage the community around ending domestic and sexual violence. It's called community mobilization. Some of you may have heard of that. So we're actually in our 4th year of a 4-year grant in that. And we're hoping to continue that work after that grant ends. So really, the goal would be to change social norms around domestic and sexual violence to where it's not, people don't see it as acceptable or tolerate it, all those kinds of things. And then our other group at North Tahoe High School, they focus on reducing the stigma around mental health issues, which is kind of a weird branch of what we do. But if you think about how violence and mental health issues, substance abuse, all these kinds of things intersect, right? So they all tie into one another. So that is why we're funded to provide that leadership club. So they do a lot at their school around creating awareness of mental health issues, reducing bullying, increasing tolerance, acceptance, all the healthy relationships, all that kind of thing. So those are our school-based programs. And then in addition to that, we do education in the community pretty much anywhere that anyone will have us to provide some kind of violence prevention education. So examples of that would be like this class, but it could also be sexual harassment in the workplace trainings. We provide self-defense classes. We go to other partner organizations that we work with that maybe they feel it's important for their staff to have some awareness of domestic violence in case one of their clients discloses to them or something like that. So we might provide them with domestic violence education, kind of all over the board. We do like parent nights around bullying prevention. So kind of all over the board. So we're pretty busy. We're all over all the time. Sometimes we go days without seeing each other in the office because we're all in different places at different times. So does anyone have any questions about the prevention program itself? All right. I think in general we are trying to move away from the classroom type education and more into how do we create actual change in our community. So moving towards that community mobilization, and that's where we kind of see like our funding going as well. Because If you know anything about nonprofits, they're funded interestingly normally. We have a lot of different funders even within our program, so doing what we need to do to actually make that change, but also to continue getting the funding to do that in our community. So that is our prevention program. And yeah, so we're gonna do a quick icebreaker. And then Joe's gonna lead us in a grounding exercise before we move into our material for today. So if you would just say, I see most of you have your cards out, but your name again, and I'm kind of auditory and visual and all that kind of thing. So, and what your first CD was that you ever owned? First CD. Does anyone want to start?
No, my first CD.
Yeah.
Yeah, Spice Girls. Duh. Spice Girls 1 and 2.
Okay, Emily and Spice Girls.
Emily and Spice Girls. 3rd grade.
I can go. My name's Greta, and my first CDs were like a 10-pack out of BMG Music. They were all like a penny, and I think one was like Bob Marley Legend and like the Reality Bites soundtrack, and I don't know, there was like some other randoms in there.
Nice.
Cassette tape might be another question.
Record.
Yeah.
My first
Yeah.
That was my first CD.
Whitney Houston would be my first musical influence, probably.
I'm Danielle, and I really cannot remember, but I did do what she did.
Oh, the music.
Yeah, when I came to America, but my first record, and I can't think of the name of the band, but it was an Australian band, and I can visualize the cover. But it was, so I'm going to go with the first record, I remember that.
Okay.
That's
I'm Dara. My first CD was The Immaculate Collection by Madonna.
I had that one.
That was a good one.
I'm Tanya, and my first CD was a birthday present. It was Britney Spears from my sister.
I'm Reina Bramila. My first CD was a romantic music.
Okay.
I can't even remember all the CDs. And my name's Janet. I can't remember all them.
What would be one of the first CDs that you had?
Probably, like Mexican artists.
Okay. Thanks.
My name is Jessica, and yeah, I'm having a hard time remembering, but I'll say I know I got a gift of Alanis Morissette.
Yeah.
Okay, my name is Mariah, and my first CD I got out of the McDonald's Happy Meal, and it was NSYNC.
Your bobblehead too?
No, they were handing out CDs. It was the coolest thing. I don't know. I don't know why they ever stopped that.
It's been so long. I hear your mom.
I'm Bonnie, and my first CD I think was, maybe like Simon and Garfunkel,
I'm Joe, and I back in the late 60s, I think Pink Floyd, The Wall, or maybe Jimmy Cliff.
Jessica, and I'm trying to think. It's one of the three. It's either NSYNC, Britney Spears, or Alanis. I think it was NSYNC. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm Danny. It was like there's a few I remember having earlier. I'll say like the Jimi Hendrix box set. Probably was. It might have been the first one. I forgot. But I had a lot. Fast.
Hi, I'm Becca. My first CD was Ace of Base. My first tape was Michael Jackson. I remember that one too.
Eric, my first CD was like a hand-me-down. It was Violent Femmes.
Hi, I'm the voice from afar.
My name's Kristen, and my first CD was No Doubt.
Nice.
That was my first. I'm Trisha. I can't remember my first CD, but I think my first tape was Like a Prayer, Madonna. We have a couple Madonnas in here. That's interesting. Same era. I guess she spanned many eras.
A lot of eras.
Yeah, and so Joe, do you want to take us away and kind of explain what we're doing?
Real quick. It sounds strange, and I think all of you live here, you probably ski or snowboard or hike or do something outside, but if not, you'll probably notice that or in yoga classes, if you focus on breathing, it sort of creates an inner calmness. And there's a reason for that. We were talking about HeartMath, I think, the other day, and the HeartMath technology came from the fetal heart rate monitor, which they used to determine the stress the baby, the fetus is in, and the mother's in during childbirth. Well, the people I've worked for said, well, what about adults? Why wouldn't that work for adults? And the fact of the matter, it does work for adults. And what they found is since the heart actually sits in a sac of tissues called the pericardial sac, it's attached to your diaphragm. So if you do like a deep abdominal breath, if you really breathe through your belly here, it pulls the diaphragm down. And when that happens, it actually pulls the pericardial sac. So it's actually giving your heart an internal cardiac massage. And it's available for all of us. It doesn't cost anything. And I think all of you probably know that if you are stressed out, if you just stop and whether it's mental stress or physical stress, if you basically just stop and focus your breathing right in this area, you'll notice within 3 or 4 or 5 breaths, you'll just start chilling out. And what happens is because of the speed of life and because we get stressed out, we start breathing in a very shallow fashion. And when you're really breathing in a shallow fashion, you're really not oxygenating your tissue. You're not really able to push enough oxygen out in the tissues. And over a period of time, that becomes chronic. Then people have all sorts of problems from that. So really the best pharmacy we have is right inside of our body, and all you have to do is breathe. So with HeartMath, we would do this before we would have work sessions or conferences or whatever, but I just recommend do it intentionally as much as you can. Breathing is a really good thing. It's what keeps us here moment by moment. And so maybe what we can do is just 10 of these breaths. And if you can, just sit and relax and breathe. Just try to push your abdomen out and just get a good deep abdominal breath. And as soon as you've done that, then just exhale out your mouth, but just completely naturally, just completely let it go. And as soon as that's hit the bottom, breathe in through your belly again. And we'll just do 10 of these and that'll be it. Okay, so let's go and begin. And if you want, you can put your hand on your stomach. It helps as a cue to push your stomach out. So let's begin. And usually I recommend for people, I actually used to get paid to teach people to do this, which is really crazy. So really paid to teach people to breathe. Okay, so just inhale. And exhale. Inhale. One more. I just invite you to feel what you're feeling right now. And just understand also when you're doing that, it produces endorphin, which it isn't like morphine, it is morphine, it's endogenous morphine. So actually circular breathing actually helps generate that as well, which is just allows you to really calm down. Whenever there's conflict anywhere, for those of you that are going into social work or psychology, I think that the biggest problem we have is we're up here too much and this drops you into your heart. So what you can notice from that is you actually sort of fall in or settle into awareness itself. just being aware of the breathing. And it's a wonderful thing you can always do, and do it before any type of presentation if you're going to, in public speaking and whatnot. Public speaking for most people creates so much fear, it's worse, it's almost as bad as being thrown in jail or having a loved one die. So, do that, or any type of performance you're going to do. So breathing's a good thing. Enjoy. And you can go to you can go to heartmath.org or .com. There's a lot of information. It's pretty cool.
Thank you. So going from that, just a reminder, as with all of the crisis intervention training classes that you take, if anyone's uncomfortable at any time or needs a break, needs some fresh air, anything like that, feel free just to walk out. You can let Andrea know if you want her to go with you or anything like that as well. That's always an option. Of course, if you need a bio break, feel free to just go and do that as well, but we will provide one about halfway through. We'll give you some time to use the restroom. So self-care by far is the most important thing. So just making sure that you're keeping in touch with how you're feeling and all that kind of thing throughout your time in crisis intervention training. So today we're going to be talking about intimate partner violence, and I just want to put out there, after the history of feminism, and today we're going to be talking a lot about violence and talking a lot about historically male violence against women again, and I don't want any of the men in the room to feel attacked or anything like that. So understanding that we're coming from kind of a historical point of view, as well as where most of the research and statistics have been gathered is from women victims, because that who has come forward in the past. We see that changing with more male victims, LGBTQ, all that kind of thing. I think is evolving, where it will be not such a dramatic difference in what we're seeing. So recognizing that, also recognizing that as well as men being victims of abuse, it can also happen in all sexual orientations, so socioeconomic statuses, races, all that kind of thing. So there is no barriers, unfortunately, in who can be a victim of abuse, right? So we're not putting it out there as men are abusing women. Also, along with that, whenever we talk about a perpetrator of violence or a victim, we want to use the term they rather than he or she or that kind of thing. So if you all can try to do that as well, that's helpful in maintaining that agreement too. And let's see. Oh, and also a lot of what we talk about in the prevention program in general. So we're going to be here talking about kind of intimate partner violence 101 and sexual abuse 101. That not all people experience abuse in the same way. A lot of what we talk about are generalizations or commonalities that are seen amongst victims and survivors of abuse. So recognizing that we're not trying to say this is how all people feel, but it's just coming from, again, kind of research and history and that kind of thing. Any questions or comments about any of those things? Putting all our disclaimers out there at one time, right? Okay, so intimate partner violence, also called domestic violence. You guys are going to learn a little bit more about teen dating violence on another day, which looks at youth specifically and how they might experience it. Interpersonal violence, there's all these different names for it. We're going to refer to it as intimate partner violence. So kind of to get us going, when you hear the term intimate partner violence, what is it? So what comes to mind when you hear intimate partner violence? And there's no right or wrong answer. It's just definitions, stereotypes. It can be whatever comes to mind.
Or partners, close partners, marital partners, or whatever.
Okay.
Girlfriend, boyfriend.
So between partners. Okay, what else? Participation helps us a lot.
Yeah. It's probably, I guess, like the most prominent type of domestic violence, like between partners as opposed to between other relationships.
Yeah.
So between
Like between your like
Your intimate
your partner.
partners.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
domestic violence,
Because it could be
does that mean you have
between other
to
people.
live together?
So we're gonna go into that right now. I'm just
Oh,
brainstorming what comes to mind when you hear those words.
Family.
Okay.
Family, okay.
Family, yeah. Intimate. Sexual violence.
Okay.
I think of sex, intimate.
Sexual violence. So even if you heard domestic violence or relationship violence.
That was a good one.
Physical violence?
Okay. Physical violence.
Good mental too, right?
Yeah, emotional.
Emotion.
Would it be someone you allowed into a space who you don't really know, but now they're in your intimate space?
So maybe crossing boundaries.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, no right, wrong answers, just kind of what comes to mind.
Power and control.
Power.
Yeah.
You're like, where'd that voice
Yeah. I thought someone's phone went off.
No, please participate.
No, thank you for
It's great.
participating. Anything else? Okay. And then the next question, or brainstorm. Why? Why does intimate partner violence exist? Why does domestic violence exist?
Insecurity.
Insecurity, okay?
Power and control.
Yeah, power.
Okay.
Power and control.
Vice versa, yeah.
Jealousy, I guess.
Infidelity.
Infidelity. Okay.
Lack of trust.
Trust issues.
Past abuse or trauma in the abuser's life.
Okay. Past abuse. So cyclical.
Cultural.
Drugs and alcohol.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Emotional disturbance.
Disturbance. Anything else?
Anger.
Anger. Okay. So we're gonna come back to a lot of these things. So we'll see a lot of these themes emerge throughout our night tonight. So yeah, just to kind of lay the groundwork out for what we're gonna be doing.
I'd also say loneliness.
Loneliness. So what do you mean by that? I'm just curious.
I think it's more sort of like just an existential observation that if you're trying to look to the world to kind of complete yourself,
Okay.
understand who you are, the world can never fulfill you.
Okay.
And so if you have a deeper sense of your inner being, then that's sort of the true source of your own expression here. And otherwise, you're trying to get it out there and you feel lonely if you're not able to connect.
Okay. Yeah, so someone basically being incomplete and feeling like
Exactly.
it's going to be somewhere else that they find
Exactly.
it. Okay. Thanks for explaining that.
I don't know.
Okay.
Like obsession or infatuation.
Okay.
Or what about finances?
No.
Money.
So
Legal.
violence occurring because of money problems.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Anything else?
Lack of communication.
Okay. Decrease. I like my arrows. Low communication.
Desperation for filling any kind of need or.
So like needs not being met?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like a dependency.
Right.
That's easier to write. Dependent or codependent. Okay. Anything else?
So think of the media, think of the stereotypes, maybe even think of like traditional roles. Yeah, and we'll go from there.
Meaner, smarter.
Okay, so like men being right. It's a stereotype, like smarter.
So,
Okay.
and also don't, I guess don't put it in ways of comparing, just
Yeah.
put the stereotype of the man.
Or
so.
like an adjective.
Yeah.
So like
Does that make sense?
smart, right?
Yeah,
Strong.
Smart, strong,
Don't cry.
don't cry.
Dominant.
Okay, don't cry. Dominant,
Loud.
loud,
Breadwinner.
provider,
Protector.
emotionally detached, breadwinner. Yeah, those are all really good.
That's the same thing.
Breadwinner. I heard protector and emotionally detached. Or emotionally detached.
If men do show an emotion, what would it be?
What emotions can they show? Anger.
Jealousy.
Jealousy.
Competitive.
Jealousy.
Forceful.
What was it?
Force.
Forceful.
Forceful. Gonna have to start writing sideways. They're good at this.
Happiness. A man can be happy.
Yeah, they can be happy or kind of like
Yeah.
funny.
Cocky.
Uh huh.
Cocky.
I like that cocky.
Entitled.
White, straight male.
Title, so like heterosexual.
Oh no, I was just saying like the ultimate stereotyped male.
Uh huh.
Authoritative.
Authoritative.
Yeah, they all those.
Better in everything.
Politician.
Best.
The best.
To like populate a list that like reinforces negative stereotypes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. We'll get into that. We're looking at those stereotypes.
And we're even, equal. We do it for.
Yeah, we'll be doing this too. I heard.
Give me like role models too.
Huh?
And also not supposed to show
My neighbor's a good role model for his daughter.
affection.
So not show affection.
Yeah, like not hugging your kid, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not so much in my generation, but it used to be a thing.
Yeah, these are like
You know, my dad didn't.
stereotypes.
Tell them you love them. Yeah, show them emotion.
Yeah, stoic.
Stoic.
Okay. Stoic.
Independent.
Independent.
Rich.
Oh, is that rich?
Yeah, more money.
Yeah, right. Money.
They deserve more money, right?
Uh huh.
One thing, yeah, that's like what a lot of those stereotypes.
Because you have to be the provider and the protector.
Yeah.
So.
And they're smarter and better.
And they're smarter and better.
So what kind of jobs would the
Yeah.
stereotypical male hold?
Oh, President of the United States.
President. Yeah, so the power job, right?
Unfortunately.
No.
Military.
I thought for sure,
President.
not, I thought. I was surprised.
Executive.
And if you're not corporate, then what would be other?
Fireman.
Mechanic.
Baseball player, football player, all sports, athletes.
Attorney.
Garbage man.
Doctor.
Athlete.
Lawyer.
Doctor.
Professors.
Lawyer.
Officers. Firemen.
So all those.
Banker.
In a job they would want.
Running out everything.
Yeah.
Except for like secretary and
What?
teacher.
Yeah. What kind of hobbies are like? And hobbies. Sports.
And what?
Working on cars.
Sports. No matter what. Cars.
Hunting.
Hunting, yeah.
Guns.
Drinking beers with their friends.
Guns.
Driving fast.
Yeah. Fast cars.
Beer.
Beer. There we go. I was looking for that. Right. What about?
And these things aren't all negative, obviously,
Yeah,
right? So it's
I like
not bad
beer.
to like be like, oh wow, I do a lot of those things.
Yeah. What about? It's like in the home. What are the jobs?
Oh,
Fixer.
Take out trash.
Yeah.
shovel. Shovel the driveway.
Glorious job.
The disciplinary.
Yeah. Discipline.
Disciplinarian.
Role models. Discipline. Yeah, right. Like looking up to your dad, role model, which is good, you know. Role model. In relationships, we have a few of them there. In a relationship.
Which one? Like with kids, wife?
Let's talk about an intimate relationship. Dating relationship.
What are you, stereotypes?
Yeah. Yeah.
Really?
We kind of talked about
Driver.
it. Huh?
Driver.
Right.
Dominant?
Leaves his wife unsatisfied?
You don't have to stay in the box, you can make it bigger.
I know, I'm trying to stay in this very small box because it reinforces something.
Oh, I see.
Right?
Oh,
Man,
I
woman,
see.
box.
I see.
So making the first move and like,
Yeah.
is that what you're saying by driver?
I didn't say driver.
Oh.
I said.
Oh, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Is that what you meant?
But
No,
yeah.
I always drive the car.
Oh, he's the driver. But like think about it also sexually or in relationships. Like,
Initiator.
huh? Initiator.
The dominant person. in a
Yeah,
relationship.
right. I think we have dominant.
Oh, yeah.
Dominant, but
Yeah.
also with that, so initiator.
Decision maker.
Yep.
Sweet. Yeah, that's a good one.
Box getting too small.
Control of the bank account.
Oh yeah. Control of finances. Yeah.
You
Finances.
get an allowance.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
That's good.
A lot in that box. All right. So we have our stereotypes for men. Let's talk about women.
Subservient.
Subservient.
Strong.
Nurturing.
Sex object.
Uh-huh.
What do you mean by
Emotional.
strong? Whoever said that.
Oh yeah.
What do you mean by strong? Physically, emotionally?
Physically.
Okay.
Well, they give birth.
Oh, okay.
They give birth,
So
so.
bearing
Bearing
children.
Yeah.
High pain threshold.
Cook.
But.
Bearing. Is it like a bear? B-A-R?
BEA.
B-E-A.
Yeah.
Children. Ready to cook.
Emotional.
Emotional.
Yeah, emotional and moody. Like
Naggy.
Hot mess.
Naggy.
crazy.
They have
Moody. Crazy.
Passive aggressive.
Nurturing.
Uh-huh.
Crybaby.
Okay.
Expensive.
Whew. Aggressive. Okay, passive aggressive. Cry.
Never satisfied.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, unreasonable expectations.
Quick to judgment.
You're
Complicated.
That's an understatement.
What about beautiful?
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Damn.
Right, so a lot about the looks, like they gotta be pretty, beautiful.
Entitled, yeah. Like,
Superficial.
well, a lot
Some
of.
say danceable.
Yeah, she's,
Yeah, like needing rescue.
Bitches.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
I like that.
all of
Animal.
Disney's is like
Yeah,
the
yeah.
girls in distress. So
Yeah.
And
then the men have to be the heroes.
yeah, usually they don't have any parents.
Bimbo.
We are role
Bimbo.
Slut.
Yeah.
We have many words.
Yeah.
Unintelligent.
Oh, no good. Don't go into the terms yet.
Okay.
So we're more just,
Dramatic.
yeah.
Dramatic.
How about fast and loose?
Yeah, promiscuous.
Good
A stereotype.
A stereotype. Yeah, it's a stereotype.
Of all women?
Have you ever heard
Well,
of
none of these
the
fit
virgin
all
whore
women.
dichotomy?
The what?
The virgin whore dichotomy.
Oh,
It's like where women are either portrayed
Yeah, as
as
being
sexy,
prudes
yeah,
or being.
Sex
or
object,
there's
Yeah.
but they're supposed to be virginal, right? So it's like this.
But if a
thing.
guy
So-
sleeps with a bunch of women, he's the man.
Yeah, right? So like,
Yeah.
let's see, initiation, but like, we're supposed to be like virgins or, right?
Right.
Yeah, back in the 60s, they called it being frigid.
Yeah. Frigid, that's kind of a good word.
Crazy cat lady.
Right, if you don't get married, you're a crazy cat lady, whereas like, if you don't get married, you're like the bachelor, the
What's it
man.
called? Spinster.
Spinster, like, so we're supposed to get married.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Spinster.
Jade.
Maid.
Maid. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, just maid.
Yeah, like what do we?
Cleaner.
Well, that's gonna come in job. Don't we go to jobs? No?
Yeah, like we
No, I meant like
Stereotype,
around
yeah,
the house.
Yeah, so domestic,
cleaner
all the domestic,
and-
a lot of the domestic
doing
chores, so
laundry
like.
and
Yeah, that's about to come up. We're gonna give you all those jobs.
Like nurse and secretary.
Uh-huh.
Like not quite the doctor or the
Yeah.
Librarian.
That's best.
You could be a secretary
Uh-huh.
or
Mom.
a teacher.
Yeah.
Those three.
Yeah.
That's it.
Professors are for
Yeah.
teachers are for
Nanny.
We're not trying to go.
Nanny.
I have
What
a
about like
High
You're a
maintenance.
teacher and a nanny. It's
a great job.
What about hobbies?
Prostitutes.
Knitting,
yeah, Manny Petty.
washing dishes.
Definitely shopping.
Dusting.
Someone said Manny Petty.
Gossiping.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Petty.
Petty is spelled wrong. It's Petty.
Oh.
Manny Petty.
Okay.
Oh, I was like, is that like pedicure?
Would you like to add that to the
Yeah, is that what you want? We'll put it there.
Waitress.
Huh? Waitress. Uh-huh. Waitress.
Like caring,
Uh-huh.
giving and caring.
Uh-huh.
Nurturing.
Oh, nurturing. That's a
Thought we hadn't, did I put nurturing up there? I'm like, so giving, caring, nurturing, caring, nurturing.
Romantic.
Right? Like, you gotta be, like, so in love with love. They have to seduce. Right? I feel like that's a stereotype. Like, love. Cool. Any others?
Creative.
Creative? Alright. Cool. Remember, these aren't just like our views. These aren't our views. These are stereotypes. So, I have a question. So then, let's say a man or a boy, what happens when they step out of this box, right? So these are boxes. This is, we'll kind of go into that a little bit more. But like, what happens when like, for instance, a man cries or a boy cries or like
Get shamed or feel
Get shamed, right?
Become feminine. Yeah.
And how does he get
feminine.
shamed? So what
Shame, so
terms or expressions
feminine.
might be used?
Don't be such a girl, you're a pussy.
So girl,
Bullied if it's
girl,
weak.
pussy,
Yeah, right?
weak. What other names might they be called?
When they don't cry.
Or when maybe they cry or they have more of these feminine traits or they, you know, they are the nurse or so.
Don't listen.
They like to knit.
Diet.
Yeah, say it in here for the sake of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, right? They'll call, I know, it's so hard to say. Faggot, right?
Gay.
Weenie.
Gay. Weenie. Queer.
Bitch.
Bitch. Yep.
Homo.
Bitch, homo.
Whipped.
Whipped, yep.
Punk.
Okay. Yeah. What are words or like what do women get called when they step out of this box? Bitch. Bitch also. Yeah. Bitch. What are other things that women get called?
Cunt.
Whore, cunt. Okay.
Reclaim it.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's part of the vagina monologues.
What else what if a woman has more of these male traits?
Man-eater.
Man-eater.
Dyke.
Butch.
Man-eater.
Butch. That's a good one.
Butch. Dyke.
Browbeater.
Browbeater? Even, what about bossy?
Bossy.
Even that, like, bossy.
Some of those words at the beginning, the S word. Yeah.
Yeah, then.
The skank word?
Huh?
Skank?
Skank, yeah.
Man, I hope that box.
Alright.
Selfish if they decide not to have kids.
Right? Super selfish because if they don't.
Work.
Huh?
Selfish if they don't have kids or they work.
Yeah, so they're looked at as selfish if they don't complete those like womanly duties. So what can we see? And we kind of talked about this, but like when men, like the shaming or the words that are called, what are these words attack? Or like what?
Demasculating.
They're demasculating, so they're feminine, right? We're calling men feminine words, or what else are we looking at?
Sexual orientation.
Their sexuality. Yeah. So it's attacking either like being a masculine if they step out of this box and calling them a girl or feminine words, or calling them not straight, not heterosexual. And then when we look at women, what are these words? What do they attack?
Mostly our
Sexuality.
Again, our sexuality, right? Again, they're looking at, they're calling someone a cunt or a slut if they,
But it's never a diss to call someone, oh, you dick. Well, it is a dick, but you're not going to call a woman a dick, really.
Right, but it's like men are only attacked. It's the same thing. It's kind of the paradigm. Men are attacked under their masculinity because we're supposed to be masculine, and women are attacked in sexuality because you're supposed to be sex objects and have babies. So it's like they're attacking you in the stereotype.
Exactly. So you're attacking.
You've been boxed in, right?
Exactly, right? So like when someone gets called a faggot or weak or a pussy, it's like society pushes them back into that box, right? And it kind of reinforces it. And same with like a woman, like, oh, you, like when we look at sexuality, okay, so like men, in the stereotype, we're supposed to initiate or like go after, right? But like if a woman does that, she's a slut. And so then it reinforces that stereotype. Right? Kind of society, pushing them back into that box. It makes it really hard to leave that box.
So if you think about if a man steps out of if a man, let's say, cries, so he's out of the box, and then he gets called those names, he gets attacked, and he goes back in the box, he's gonna, next time that happens, he might be likely to reinforce the box. So rather than cry, he's gonna what? Get angry, get mad, get aggressive, instead of crying because he doesn't want the same result to happen, right? So that's how those boxes can be reinforced if you think about those attacks happening, right?
One thing you need to add to the box for the man, I don't think we said hero.
Yeah, right?
And on the other side outside the box is soft or cowardice.
Right? And then think about if weak. And like, or if, we all need help sometimes. So how hard is that to then look for mental health help or something if you're supposed to be strong and stoic and, you have to be the hero. You don't look for it. And then, like, we all need it. We're all humans, right? Or if you can't have, I don't know. So looking for that, from that, how do you think these stereotypes and when they're reinforced in society, how do you think that can affect relationships? Like sexual, romantic relationships.
Stresses.
The pressure on them.
Yeah.
Makes them whack.
Right?
Confused.
Confused.
Unfair playing field.
Yeah.
If you are a woman, you're that, and if you're not, you're that. And same for the man. Well, then what's the point?
Yeah. How does it? So again, maybe kind of thinking back to intimate partner violence, which is our topic today. How do these boxes maybe affect intimate partner violence?
Or create them for sure.
Right, yeah. Like what you were saying, if they go back in and they don't want to cry again, so they have to act out in some other way, and violence happens.
Right? like dominant, submissive, subservient, right? So if we have these gender roles, it really creates the, an unequal. And so again, this isn't, and that's a good, brings us to our next point. We're not excusing these behaviors, but we just want to look at society and culture and how it can create these really unhealthy roles and like a unlevel playing field, right? When dating and relationships. And, we see intimate partner violence in all relationships, and it can go back and forth, but historically in society, a lot of times we see in heterosexual relationships, when we look at intimate partner violence, some of this unbalance.
It's really a distortion of gender identification. It's just total distortion, because we're really not any of those things.
No,
Playing
of
that's
course
not
not.
who we are.
Yeah, right? Like we all have, we all have emotions.
These are still. I mean, I'm kind of disconnected from like mainstream media, and a lot of, but this is still like an older way of thinking. We're moved past this, like mostly at this point, right? We're getting past this, right?
We're trying. We're hoping to.
This is not the world that I live in.
Me either. Yeah, I'm just saying. I felt like we're doing this as a practice. Like, but I also, like I said, I'm very disconnected. And
It depends.
People that are.
But I feel like if you, for example, take video games, right?
Yeah.
And like the violence and the and women in video games they're just like excess pieces that are like
Barbie dolls.
prostitutes or you know what I mean, like those
I
kind
don't
of
know. I
things.
played a lot of video games where the women were the main characters and badasses. So
Yeah. Yeah, and it's definitely an evolving thing, but I think this is where
But
a lot
there's-
of our gender roles still exist.
If we're complaining about our partner to a friend, I bet all of us in some place have used those words in those boxes because it fits the argument and you'll get validation. So it's like if you hit any of those words, your friend or whoever is going to validate you and go, oh yeah, women are or men are, and it's going to be easy. So we all still do it in some way.
Yeah, and we are evolving, and that's the good thing. That is a good thing because we are having more awareness of it and whatnot. But I feel like you can still see this a lot in society and in the media and in movies and in TV shows.
I kind of feel like we're evolving away from the problem. When we're discussing feminism includes LGBTQ. So it's inclusive of all different types of genders, where the men don't really have that whole acceptance. We're bringing everyone in. So when you talk about main gender roles, instead of being a man, someone's gonna go and be a woman and kind of adopt the opposite gender because the man's one isn't. Like, I guess that's not super clear. But it's like, if you're not fitting into your box, you're gonna go create another box instead of try to work with what you're doing. There's like pressure to change completely into a woman if you're not manly.
I think I mean there's a whole like gender spectrum, right? So people identify men, women, and all in between or neither, or you know what I mean?
And I mean, I'm gonna say that it's kind of like you should still be able to be a man but have whatever and all the qualities of this, right? Or be a woman and have all the qualities or not be forced to identify with anything. And this is a very binary, but that is another other subject which we're not exactly talking about. But yeah, like essentially we want to say, you can be a full person and have all of these things, and it's not identified because you're a man or a woman, but many times society reinforces these. And just to kind of look at that and how that can relate to violence in society.
In addition to that, we're talking about stereotypes in the media, but who uses these terms? These attacking terms. Would you say everyone?
A lot of
right?
people,
So
all the time.
women are saying this to women. Women are saying that to men. Men are saying that to men. Men are saying that to women. It's like it's it surrounds us, right?
Yeah.
So really thinking about even the language we use and kind of how that sets up a hierarchy, which reinforces the our gender boxes as well.
Does that cross all cultures?
It's different between cultures. Yeah, I'd say it's different, but sometimes similar. Especially with certain ones, in certain cultures, like being dominant or having to be the provider, being strong, and maybe we're.
Aren't there some, I think it's Africa, where women are.
All the men roles, like it's a total switch.
Yeah, there's matriarchal societies as well.
I wonder how they go.
Yeah,
If they have the
it's
same issues but
interesting.
switched.
Yeah, I don't know. I couldn't tell you. That's a good question.
How does this relate to your work?
Okay, great question. So, when we're talking about intimate partner violence, and we're really looking at the root of it, like what's causing it. It's not because someone decided to wake up one day and hurt their partner. It really is about power and control. But we're also looking at the larger societal issues or larger societal pressures that make someone feel that they need power and control over their partner, right? And so that's how it relates. So when we're looking at really the root causes of violence, one of them is gender. Another one, we look at, we can look at like race or socioeconomic status, but you can't say, oh, just don't hit your partner, or like, yeah, I'm gonna work with you about your anger issues when you have all these societal pressures to be this person and fit in this box. So it's one way to really look at those root causes. So if we can break those gender roles, then we can start to break those cycles of violence.
I just wanted to point out too, and maybe you guys are going to kind of go into this at some point, but being able to kind of break out of that box, I think where you fall within privilege and power within our society also affects that ability to
Absolutely.
And yeah, like I've heard a lot of people say like that's not what I like know or see, but I think it depends on where you are in life.
Exactly.
In this world, so.
Has anyone ever told you that it's okay to not be this way, or is that everyone? Have you ever had a class like this? Like not everyone gets that. Like, and so it definitely has a lot to do with privilege and power in society.
I think fear is the root of all of them.
Fear of rejection.
Fear of all the fears.
Absolutely. Like you get pushed out of your friend group because you don't fit in that box. Absolutely. Like that's huge in society. And
as a women, we are the ones that bear the children, and we generally are the ones that are raising the kids. So we need that security from the men too, even though as a modern woman you don't want to admit it, but you kind of do. So it's like, if they're not giving us the security, then it's kind of both ways. And then if we shame them, it's like a whole messy system.
Yeah.
Yep.
And even if you look at like families where both parents work and they have kids and everything like that, and they consider themselves equal partners, the woman in that household still does 80% of the household chores. Which it's just interesting because. And then we can go think about like nature versus nurture and all that kind of thing, like as well. But it's just kind of interesting to think about.
I think like for my generation, like I'm so in awe of how I love seeing the guys taking the kids out hiking, and they got all the gear, they got the baby in the backpack, and they're just, that didn't happen back in the day. And they all know how to change diapers. They know how to do the little hip comfort bumping and all that, And speaking for I have 3 sons, and all 3 of them really are good cleaners. They know how to clean.
Good job. So
and they know how to cook. Yes.
Our gender roles are changing and evolving.
It's changed so much. You have no idea.
But to touch on even on that, even still, you can read articles on Huffington Post about stop calling the dads babysitters when they have their kids all the time, because that's just what the role is. Like, oh, your husband let you go out tonight? How nice, is he babysitting the kid?
It's like a really organic, positive thing for the kids, have
sure.
this much deeper relationship with their father. And of course, for the couple, you know, to be able to switch it up, that the woman can like bring home some good money.
Yeah.
You know, but you can you can be more authentically who you really are, not the box.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's what we want to move towards and have healthy relationships. But unfortunately, we're not there yet. But getting there.
My group of friends is doing it for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have an hour and 15-minute video that we're gonna watch. So if we could just take like a 5-minute break, does that work for everyone? And then come back and do that? Okay, great, thank you. Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna start the video. It's called Tough Guys 2. Yes, there is a Tough Guys 1. Tough Guys 2 was made in 2013 by this guy named Jackson Katz. And again, we're looking at violence as it relates to manhood, and then we're gonna apply that. This is actually the last thing that we're really looking at gender with. After the video, we're gonna get more into the actual ins and outs of intimate partner violence, and that's what you'll be doing next Monday as well, I think. So yeah, and then we have a couple of debrief questions for you guys when we are done with it. So we'll lower the lights and start the video. Let me start the video first though, since I don't know what I'm doing.
I think you just hit play.
Yeah, and again, if anyone needs to leave the room at any
There has been a shooting.
Once again, a mass shooting. 6 people, including 20 children, were killed.
The deadliest mass shooting in American history.
You were just joining us. 2 young men, apparently dressed in long black trench coats, opened fire at a high school just outside of Denver in Littleton, Colorado.
When it comes to violence, it's almost like there are 2 Americas.
It's horrific. I can't even you can't put it into words.
There's the America that recoils in horror whenever a brutal mass shooting erupts onto our television screens, shocked by the level of destruction and suffering that just a few individuals are capable of visiting upon so many innocent people.
Police say that the gunman opened fire in a theater during a showing of that latest Batman movie, The Dark Knight Rises.
And then there's the America that can't seem to get enough of violence as a form of entertainment and ritual, a seemingly endless appetite for ever-intensifying spectacles of all-out brutality and carnage. The question is what sort of relationship, if any, these 2 Americas have to one another. And if we're serious about answering that question, we need to stop chasing symptoms and take a good look at a truth that's been hiding in plain sight all along. That when we talk about violence in America, whether it's real or imaginary, we're almost always talking about violent masculinity. I'm Jackson Katz, and for more than 25 years I've been studying the causes of violence with a special focus on how cultural ideas about manhood contribute to interpersonal and relationship violence and also shape U.S. political culture. In addition to researching, writing, and lecturing about manhood and violence, I've worked on both a personal and an institutional level to engage men directly in the effort to prevent men's violence against women and children. My colleagues and I work closely with men from across the racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic spectrum in the sports culture, in the U.S. military, and in schools, colleges, and a variety of other settings. And as I've done this work, I've been consistently impressed by the thoughtful and sometimes courageous ways men are willing to confront the issue of men's violence when they actually have a supportive environment and a chance to talk about it. The reason I work with and focus on men is simple, because for the most part, violence is a men's issue. Whether we're talking about the horrifying, high-profile mass shootings we've seen over recent decades, the far greater rates of murder and gun violence we see on a day-to-day basis that barely register in the national news, or the epidemic of sexual and domestic violence, the vast majority of this violence is committed by men, young men, and boys. The statistics tell the story. 86% of armed robberies are committed by men. 77% of aggravated assaults are committed by men. 87% of stalkers are men. 86% of domestic violence incidents resulting in physical injury are perpetrated by men. 99% of rapes are committed by men, Men commit approximately 90% of murder. And over the past 30 years, 61 of the last 62 mass shootings have been committed by men. But while these numbers are striking, they rarely if ever come into play in mainstream discussions about violence.
After every event like this, the questions always are the same. What causes this kind of a shooting? How can this happen? How can they be stopped?
Look at media coverage of mass shootings. During hours and hours of exhaustive reporting, commentators seem to go out of their way to find gender-neutral ways to talk about this violence.
The shooters in Aurora, the shooters in Newtown, the Connecticut shooter,
The Aurora shooter.
The alleged shooter, teenage psychopath.
Mass murderers.
The suspect.
that kid,
This punk, this murderer.
The male perpetrators become shooters or murderers or assailants or killers or suspects or psychopaths and any number of other genderless beings.
It's kids killing kids in the heart of America.
Violence committed by boys becomes kids killing kids and youth violence.
Here is a revealing and frankly horrifying picture of youth violence in America.
It doesn't seem to matter that girls are kids and youths too, but only commit a fraction of these kinds of crimes. The issue gets framed as a kids issue and a problem with youth in general. And this baseline failure to acknowledge gender has a big effect when the discussion turns to other supposed causes of violence.
Violence in the entertainment culture.
Bloody games, gory movies, brutal TV shows.
Call of Duty or Halo.
Mental health issues, the faith issues, autism or Asperger's syndrome. You're blaming the gun. Their mom and their dad. Substance abuse. Mental health, violent games, violent movies. I want to blame the real culprit. Alex. Suicide pills. Alex. Mass murder pills. Okay, let me ask you.
Over and over again, we hear experts trying to explain violence in America by speculating about everything from guns and drugs and video games to dysfunctional families and even lead paint. But we hear very little, if anything, about why it is that girls and women also live in a culture saturated with guns and media violence, also suffer from mental illness, also come from dysfunctional families and have substance abuse problems, also live in houses with lead paint, yet don't commit anywhere near the amount of violence boys and men do. An article in the New York Times a while back provides a classic and typical example of how this kind of degendering works. It was this long piece that sifted through every possible theory, trying to make sense of the wave of school shootings, and in one parenthesis it said, all these shootings were done by boys. So you have a whole article trying to pull together all the different factors that might shed light on these shootings, and the one that's maybe the most important ends up in parentheses. In other cases, the perpetrators disappear altogether.
Violence against women. Violence against women. Violence against women.
You see this a lot in the mainstream discussion about so-called violence against women. We call it violence against women as though nobody's actually committing the violence, like it's something bad that just happens to women, like the weather. They're just experiencing it. The fact that men are responsible for somewhere around 98% of this violence simply evaporates. We hear about women being harassed, abused, assaulted, or raped. Men are nowhere to be found. And the result of all this is that instead of seeing men's violence against women as a men's issue and taking a serious and sustained look at why it is that so many men are doing so much violence to women, we see it as a women's issue and focus most of our attention on how to help victims and survivors after the fact. And this has been true across the board. No matter what kind of violence is under scrutiny, there's been a systematic failure to focus on men as men. A failure all the more glaring given that mainstream media outlets have no problem at all taking gender seriously when women are the ones doing the violence.
Teenage girls involved in violent fights. A fight between two young girls breaks out on the playground.
More and more teenage girls are getting involved in violent fights.
When girls and women act out violently, their gender becomes the story. The same way race becomes the story with men of color.
The horrific murder rate in Chicago. Does it have to do with guns or race?
When men of color rape women or shoot people or blow things up, race and culture move to the forefront of the story.
Is there a racial situation? Not necessarily.
Crowding out the fact that the vast majority of the perpetrators under consideration, no matter what color they are men. All of this is partly a function of how dominant ideologies work linguistically to conceal the power of dominant groups. For example, when we hear the word race in the United States, we tend immediately to think about African Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans, Native Americans, Pacific Islanders, South Asians. When we hear the term sexual orientation, we tend to think of gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgendered people. And when we hear the term gender, we tend to think of women. In each case, the dominant group, white people, heterosexual people, men, don't get examined. As if white people don't belong to some racial grouping, as if heterosexual people don't have some sort of sexual orientation, as if men don't have a gender. In other words, we always focus on the subordinated group and not on the dominant one. And that's one of the ways that the power of dominant groups isn't questioned, by remaining invisible. And when it comes to masculinity, this invisibility often runs across the political spectrum.
I'm here to open up an account.
Okay, what type of account would you?
I want the account where I can get the free gun.
Okay.
So in Bowling for Columbine, which is widely considered one of the definitive documentaries about gun violence in America, left-wing filmmaker Michael Moore explores multiple reasons for America's continuing love affair with guns, including white fears of black crime, but somehow manages to avoid mentioning that the white people he focuses on throughout are overwhelmingly men. And on those rare occasions when the subject of men does make its way into mainstream discussions about violence, the conversation is usually less about men's identity than it is about their genes.
There are young men involved in these things. There's a lot of testosterone there.
What is it about the testosterone of being a young man that makes this come to this gun violence head so often?
Why does it seem that these mass shooters are boys and not girls?
Well, I think, you know what, I think there's probably some gender difference there. Maybe there's some insulation from, things endocrine, whether it's the estrogen level or who knows what.
There's this common refrain that biology and evolutionary history are destiny, that men's violence is all about testosterone, and our prehistoric role as hunter warriors were just programmed to be violent.
It goes back to hunter-gatherer days.
Yeah. You hear another version of this in the common refrain, boys will be boys.
Let boys be boys. They want to play rough. Don't try and over-medicate them and, turn them into girls. They're boys.
A 6-year-old boy goes like this, and he's suspended. And we end up having to talk about it because, they just are unable to let boys be boys.
And it all amounts to pretty much the same thing. Men's violence is somehow inevitable. We should just all throw up our hands and let the criminal justice system sort it out.
One thing we can say for certain is men are more violent than women. This is a natural phenomenon. There's a close association between hormonal balances and levels of violence. I think this is fairly clear.
No one would deny that there are biological factors that sometimes come into play with violence. The problem is when biological arguments lead people to conclude that men are just beasts who are overcome by hormonal urges they can't control.
The area of the brain that's responsible for aggression is larger in general in men. And so men's natural tendencies towards being aggressive.
The fact is that human behavior is a product of a complex set of biological and environmental factors. And it's the height of male bashing to suggest otherwise, to imply that men are incapable of making moral and ethical decisions, that boys are born hardwired to bully, rape, and murder. But perhaps the most damaging thing this kind of thinking does is that it blinds us to the fundamental role that cultural systems play in all of this.
This is a document signed by 6 of the major public health organizations saying that the violence in the entertainment, the level that we've attained to today, is causing increased aggressive behavior among some children.
For decades, experts and government officials have been arguing that we need to take a closer look at the relationship between violence in the culture and violence in the real world.
Does anyone disagree with that conclusion that violence in films propagates violent conduct on behalf of the children?
This focus on the culture of violence in America took on new and bipartisan urgency in the wake of Adam Lanza's cold-blooded murder of 20 children and 6 adults at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut in 2012.
And in the days since the heartbreaking tragedy in Newtown, Connecticut, I also tasked the Vice President with leading an effort to come up with a comprehensive set of serious proposals to keep our children safe, including strengthening school safety, improving mental health care, and addressing a culture that too often glorifies guns and violence.
But unfortunately, it quickly descended into a distracting and false debate between defenders of the gun industry and defenders of the entertainment industry.
There exists in this country, sadly, a callous, corrupt, and corrupting shadow industry that sells and stows violence against its own people through vicious, violent video games.
On one side, we've had the gun industry blaming movies and video games.
We have blood-soaked films out there, like American Psycho, Natural Born Killers, that are aired like propaganda loops on splatter days, and every single day.
On the other side of the debate, we've had the entertainment industry blaming the NRA and guns.
Can we not do a better job on controlling the weapons of violence that get to the wrong hands?
What both sides have failed to mention is how for years they've been mutually reinforcing parts of the same culture of violence and have profited handsomely from one another.
We are here at the 2012 International Photo Shoot for Medal of Honor Warfighter. I'm here with Drake Clark from Magpul, a great partner. They brought CTRs, we got PMags, we got EMags.
It's a dirty little secret that the video game industry and the Hollywood film industry get paid by the firearms industry to feature popular gun brands in their games and movies, and that the American military uses Call of Duty and other video games in their recruitment and training.
Watch and learn.
And the reason reason this matters so much is that while we've been debating whether guns or movies and video games are more to blame for violence, we've missed how both of these industries have combined to glorify not only violence, but a particular brand of violent masculinity. The fact is that when we talk about a culture of violence in America, we're almost always talking about a culture of violent masculinity. And when we talk about a culture of violent masculinity, we're talking about what the culture teaches boys about what it means to be a man. We often talk about violence being a learned behavior, but it's more to the point to say that it's a taught behavior. And by shifting the focus from learned to taught, we shift the onus of responsibility onto those of us who are teaching our sons what it means to be a man. William Pollock introduced the idea of a boy code in which boys are taught from a very early age to act tough and not show their feelings. Michael Kimmel extended the reach of the boy code into late adolescence and young adulthood, where he describes a guy code in which young men police each other into conformity with dictates about manhood that come with an implicit and sometimes explicit warning. Don't slip up or you risk being unmasked and found out as someone who doesn't measure up. The result is that guys are put into a box that turns out to be the perfect breeding ground for violence. We can't show any emotion except anger. We can't think too much or seem too intellectual. We can't back down when someone disrespects us. We have to show we're tough enough to inflict physical pain and take it in turn. We're supposed to be sexually aggressive with women. And then we're taught that if we step out of this box, we risk being seen as soft, weak, feminine, or gay.
Where in the hell are you from anyway, Private? Sir, Texas, sir! Holy dog shit! Texas, only steers and queers come from Texas, Private Cowboy. And you don't much look like a steer to me, so that kind of narrows it down.
It may be an extreme case, but I don't think there's a guy out there who can't relate on a gut level to the excruciating scenes in the classic film Full Metal Jacket, when Drill Sergeant Hartman goes to work driving basic human qualities out of the young recruits in order to turn them into men.
You're so ugly you could be a modern art masterpiece. What's your name, fat buddy?
Sir, Leonard Lawrence, sir.
Lawrence what, of Arabia?
Sir, no, sir.
I don't like the name Lawrence. Only faggots and sailors are called Lawrence. From now on, you're Gomer Pyle.
Sir, yes, sir.
Anything short of full-scale emotional shutdown becomes a source of humiliation and shame. And in response, young men learn to adopt what I call the tough guys, the front so many young men put up to shield their vulnerabilities and avoid being ridiculed as pussies, punks, fags, and an endless list of other sexist and homophobic put-downs.
Faggot. Faggot. Faggots.
Square. Fairy. Sissy. Bitch.
Bitch. Bitch.
Bitch. Homo. Pussy.
Pussy. Pussy.
Pussy.
As sociologist C.J. Pascoe details in her harrowing book, Dude, You're a Fag, the day-to-day humiliation boys and young men are subject to on a daily basis in our schools borders on criminal. Their every move relentlessly and brutally scrutinized for anything with even a whiff of femininity or weakness by peers that take it upon themselves to serve as gender cops.
Are you calling stupid?
No, I said gym class was stupid.
No, I said gym class was... Listen to this little faggot.
But it doesn't just come from their peer groups. It comes from fathers, coaches, and older male role models as well, who take it upon themselves to school young men in what it takes to measure up to a patriarchal ideology that says being a man is about domination, power, aggression, and control.
Hit me. Come on, hit me. Come on. Come on, Jack. Hit me. Hit me. Hit me. Come on. Come on. Here it is. Here it is. Hit it. Come on, son. Come on. Son, left. What are you doing?
This was captured brilliantly in the Clint Eastwood film Gran Torino.
Now you're just gonna learn how guys talk. How you doing, Martin, you crazy Italian prick? Who's the nip? Oh, he's the pussy kid from next door. I'm just trying to man him up a little bit. You see, kid? Now that's how guys talk to one another. They do? Now go on out and come back in and talk to him like a man. Like a real man.
Eastwood's character, like so many fathers, father figures, coaches, and other men in boys' lives, assumes the role of the director and proceeds to evaluate how well the young man performs his role.
What's up, you old Italian prick? What the hell are you doing? Have you lost your mind?
But that's what you said. That's what you said, men say.
You don't just come in and insult a man in his own shop.
What should I have said then?
It ain't rocket science, for Christ's sake.
It doesn't matter how unnatural, complicated, or ridiculous the role is, boys are expected to learn their lines and master the tough guys, or else risk being shamed as less than a man.
Just turn around and go.
A pair of animated films show very clearly how this process is passed down intergenerationally.
It's a fish eat fish world. You either take or you get taken.
In Shark Tale, the father shark explains to his son that violence is the way of the world.
Lenny, you see something, you kill it, you eat it, period. Thanks. That's what sharks do. That's a fine tradition. What's the matter with you? Right here in front of me now, eat this.
He then makes it clear to his son, who is a vegetarian, that he has no choice but to conform to shark norms and become carnivorous and aggressive.
Frankie, I want you to take Lenny out, show him the ropes.
Oh, come on, Pop.
Son, you're gonna learn how to be a shark, whether you like it or not.
I'm gonna kill you, Dragon. I'm gonna cut out your heart and take it to my father. I'm a Viking. I am a Viking!
Similarly, in How to Train Your Dragon, the son of a Viking leader runs into problems when he refuses to act violently. And the unwillingness of the boy to use violence causes a crisis in his relationship with his warrior father.
I don't want to fight dragons. Come on, yes you do.
Who can't even comprehend that his son might not want to follow in his violent footsteps.
You're not a Viking. You're not my son.
Qualities like compassion, caring, empathy, intellectual curiosity, fear, vulnerability, even love, basic human qualities that boys have inside them every bit as much as girls do, get methodically driven out of them by a sexist and homophobic culture that labels these things unmanly, feminine, womanly, and gay, and teaches boys to avoid them at all costs. And, most importantly, they're taught that real men turn to violence not as a last resort, but as the go-to method of resolving disputes, and also as the primary means of winning respect and establishing masculine credibility. The American ideal of the real man owes a lot to the Hollywood Western and the ultimate icon of white American masculinity, John Wayne.
Young fella, if you're looking for trouble, I'll accommodate you.
While other men talked a lot, thought too much, equivocated, and showed emotion, John Wayne made the world bend to his will with just a stare, a few words, his fists, and his guns.
But I haven't lost my temper in 40 years. But Pilgrim, you caused a lot of trouble this morning. Might have got somebody killed. And somebody ought to belt you in the mouth. But I won't. I won't. The hell I won't.
You won't get away with it, Cody.
Cody, huh? You've got a good memory for names. Too good.
And then there's Hollywood gangster films with cinematic tough guys like James Cagney and Humphrey Bogart.
Don't move out of you, son. I'll fill your pants full of lead. Get over there.
Men hardened by the world, who knew the power of a few clipped words and a few rounds of ammunition.
Humphrey Bogart, James Cagney. They teach me to talk. I like those guys.
And this equation between toughness, manhood, and violence has continued and in many ways intensified over time.
Say hello to my little friend!
So in the wildly popular remake of the 1932 gangster film Scarface, starring Al Pacino, it's all about the projection of toughness and the use of violence to achieve respect and success as a man.
In this country, you gotta make the money first. Then when you get the money, you get the power. Then when you get the power, then you get the woman.
Tony Montana's goal is to redeem his peasant childhood and his status as a Cuban exile by striking fear in others and becoming master of his own universe.
Get him, Jesus! Get him! No!
And remorseless violence is the means to that end. The movie remains more popular today than ever, maintaining its cult status with young men across generations and racial and ethnic lines. And some of our most cherished embodiments of tough guy masculinity are a collection of robed cops, vigilantes, and glorified psychopaths who see a broken world of bureaucracy and inefficiency and unfairness around them and decide to take matters into their own hands.
I will look for you. I will find you. And I will kill you.
And there's a whole range of other iconic representations of American manhood that regularly show up on popular lists of all-time greatest guy flicks. All of these films, to a number, linking being a man with using violence or the threat of violence to command respect and achieve power. There's Clint Eastwood as Dirty Harry, dishing out justice at the end of the barrel of a long gun.
You could ask yourself a question. Do I feel lucky? Well, do you, punk?
Sylvester Stallone as John Rambo, killing his way through Vietnam to do the job our feckless American government is incapable of doing by bringing our POWs home.
Do you really think you have a chance against us, Mr. Cowboy?
Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker. Bruce Willis as John McClane, restoring order to a disordered world in the Die Hard movie.
Happy trails, Hans.
Where are they? The Dark Knight doing battle against the psychotic, terroristic ruthlessness of the Joker. And Ryan Gosling as a kind of post-apocalyptic John Wayne, setting out to save the town and the damsel in distress by visiting sociopathic rage and violence on anyone who gets in his way. Running through all this is the glorification of a kind of warrior masculinity that blurs the line between being a man and using violence to prove you're a man. Some directors have made a career out of this kind of thing. Mel Gibson has made a string of movies that amount to pageants of tough guy warrior masculinity, going so far as to turn Jesus Christ into the ultimate real man. Treating viewers to a 2-hour torture fest to drive the point home that Jesus was not just the prophet of peace and kindness, but tough enough to endure levels of pain that would put today's ultimate fighters to shame. And Quentin Tarantino's body of work can be read as a kind of tribute to the cinematic tradition of badass tough guys. From the stylized violence of Pulp Fiction to his rewrite of the American Western as a slave revenge tale. And we see the same glorification of violence as a legitimate tool for settling scores and expressing manhood, even in kids' movies.
Peter said, get out of it!
Peter's not king yet.
Then, on a parallel track, you have the endless slate of films that glamorize male sexual aggression.
Just stop being a pussy and nail her, okay?
How do you not see the point? There's the point. There's the point.
Okay.
There's 2 more fucking points right there.
A long-standing cultural narrative that says being a man is about sexual conquest.
So did you bang her? Oh yeah, I banged her. That's what a man does, okay?
The clear and deeply entrenched message to young men here, reinforced again and again over time, is that actually caring about girls and women is for pussies and fags.
I need a little bit more time with Carly. There, I said it, okay? And I know you think that's lame, but can you please just give me one more day?
That's not lame, bro. That's gay.
The actual living, breathing humanity of girls and women matters a lot less than turning them into trophies to prove you're a real man and win the approval of your friends. Hollywood movies are one of the great teaching forces of our time. But it's not just movies. Look at violent video games, which provide guys with an immersive and interactive experience that allows them to master their environment and impose their will through violence. Or the rise of 24/7 internet pornography, a multi-billion-dollar industry that sexualizes men's control and dominance over women. Look at popular men's sports that often seem to be less about healthy competition than about proving toughness through physical force and violence and dominating and humiliating the opposition. Look at the world of advertising, which sells products by exploiting men's anxieties about not measuring up. And look at our political culture, where the game is all about establishing your manly credentials by butching yourself up and methodically feminizing and taking apart the manhood of your opponents.
And to those critics who are so pessimistic about our economy, I say, don't be economic girly man.
What most discussions about violence miss is how pervasive and interconnected this larger story about manhood is, how it creates a kind of all-pervasive cultural script that says physical toughness, force, and violence are legitimate ways for men to achieve and maintain power and control. A script that men and boys are expected to adhere to, whether they want to or not.
Good morning. This is Randy Pion on KRES Radio, the voice of the Coeur d'Alene Indian Reservation.
In the groundbreaking film Smoke Signals, one of the first features produced by Native Americans, there's this memorable scene where an older kid tries to teach a younger kid how to be a real-life Hollywood Indian.
Don't you even know how to be a real Indian?
I guess not.
I guess I'll have to teach you then, ain't it? First of all, quit grinning like an idiot. Indians ain't supposed to smile like that. Get stoic. No, like this. mean or people won't respect you. White people will run all over you if you don't look mean. You gotta look like a warrior. You gotta look like you just came back from killing a buffalo.
But our tribe never hunted buffalo. We were fishermen.
What? You wanna look like you just came back from catching a fish? This ain't Dances with Salmon, you know. Thomas, you gotta look like a warrior. There. That's better.
The scene is funny, but it also shows how the pressure to conform to ideals of violent masculinity cuts across racial, ethnic, and class lines. In fact, in a lot of ways, the pressure to conform is more acute among men whose power and identity are under threat in the real world from things like racism and growing economic inequality. As the sociologist Richard Majors has pointed out, African American and other men of color in urban areas often adopt a hypermasculine, menacing persona he calls the cool pose to signal that they're still men, regardless of what else has been stripped from them. This is also true with Latino men, who are disproportionately portrayed in Hollywood as gangbangers, Mexican drug lords, and thugs in the barrio, images that are crude stereotypes, but which nonetheless have become symbols of toughness to some poor and working class Latinos whose manhood has been undermined by class exploitation and ethnic discrimination. And we see the same thing when it comes to Asian masculinity.
I have a wonderful idea. Would you like to go to the dance with Sam?
In American popular culture, Asian men have long been emasculated, stereotyped as ineffectual, desexualized, and unmanly.
That's the more better.
I want my purse back.
What? Your purse? That's not a purse, it's a satchel!
It's a purse, okay?
But since the early 1970s, running counter to this long line of neutered stereotypes is the tough guy image of Bruce Lee, and stars like Jackie Chan and Jet Li, who remasculinized the image of Asian and Asian American men with the highly stylized physicality and violence of the martial arts. But young Asian American men don't just have to look to Bruce Lee for cues. Increasingly, we've seen the phenomenon of Asian guys adopting the tough guy street styles of African American and Latino men to establish their masculine credentials.
Hey, homie, I don't know what you had heard, but I ain't trying to act like no motherfucking black person, you know what I'm saying? This is me, this is all OG, this is all the original shit that you gonna get ever in your life.
And this holds true for a lot of white guys as well.
Oh, cool, yo, I'm just forcing one of those two hoes over there scratching at over who gets to knock the boots with me, you know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Many people have commented on the strange phenomenon of white suburban middle-class kids acting black.
Damn, woman, why you gotta be such a raging bitch?
Oh, please listen to you. Look, there's a mirror right there. Why don't you take a look, okay? You're white.
Middle-class white boys may not have a lot of experience with the kind of real-world inner-city conditions that gave rise to the cool pose, but the culture tells them if they take on this black, urban, hard guy pose, they'll somehow be more real, more of a man.
You happen to be white. I'm talking raised on Rapola Street white, where your mama used to drag you down to St. Casimir's just like all the other little piss pants on the block.
What makes this even more interesting is that a lot of the very guys they see as models of authenticity are themselves projecting an image they picked up from the culture. As the writer Nathan McCall has said, he and some of his African-American male cohorts got some of their ideas of manhood from The Godfather and other gangster films that featured tough, ruthless, white Italian gangsters.
Someday, and that day may never come, I'll call upon you to do a service for me. But until that day, accept this justice as a gift on my daughter's wedding day.
One day, and that day may never come, I'm gonna call you to do something for me. Until then, take this justice as a gift. All right? Thank you, Godfather.
And you hear the same kind of thing about Scarface.
It's one of the hottest movies ever made.
This is the all-time greatest movie.
Never seen nothing like that.
Nigga, that shit was a fucking Bible.
I watched this movie 63 times.
If you was a comic book lover, you love Batman. If you was out in the streets, you love Scarface.
Cycling knife to the back.
So we have this interesting phenomenon where we have white middle-class males emulating poor urban black males who in turn are getting part of their idea about manhood from gangster films featuring white men who are playing Italian and Cuban American gangsters.
Now are we made or are we made, man?
The paradox is that the test of being real somehow comes down to how well you live up to a made-up script.
Scarface on repeat. Scarface on repeat. Constant, y'all.
And it's a script that's only become increasingly violent over time.
I'm hot! I'm big!
All this began because it was time to push myself harder.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
I gotta get a pump.
That's it. It's good. It hurts. I know it does. That's it. Get it.
There's no question that over the past few decades, there's been a ratcheting up of what it takes to be considered a real man. Look at our action heroes. In the 1950s, Superman was the equivalent of an ordinary guy running around in tights and a cape. And today, he's pumped up and ripped. Well, look at Batman. The body of Adam West as Batman in the 1960s is a far cry from the far more imposing Dark Knight of the 21st century. Pro wrestlers' bodies in the 1960s were more flabby. In the 21st century, they're way more sculpted, pumped up, and ripped. And look at toy action figures. If you look at the Star Wars toy figurines that kids played with in the 1970s and contrast them with the Star Wars toy figurines that are being marketed to kids today, you see a dramatic shift. Well, look at the body of G.I. Joe. A study done in the late 1990s found that over the past 50 years, the size of G.I. Joe's biceps, in real-life equivalents, increased from 12.2 inches in 1964 to 15.2 inches in 1974 to 16.4 inches in 1994 and up to 26.8 inches by 1998. If you wanted a comparison to a real person, the biceps of someone like The Rock are reportedly only about 20 inches. Meanwhile, women have been taking up less symbolic space. Whereas full-figured women like Marilyn Monroe and Jane Mansfield represented ideal female beauty in the 1950s, today that ideal has become much smaller, thinner, younger, more girlish, and more waifish. Over the same time period, there's been a ratcheting up of violence itself. In the films of the 1950s and 60s, a few punches was all it took to establish a man's tough guy cred. Today, the level of brutality is like a different world. We've gone from the comparatively orderly sport of boxing to today's #1 fighting sport, the street fighting viciousness of mixed martial arts and cage fighting. We've gone from iconic tough guys who armed themselves with pistols and the occasional machine gun in the 1940s to larger weaponry in the 1970s, to the increasing militarization of these weapons in the 80s and 90s, to the larger-than-life heavy metal killing machines we have today.
You mustn't be afraid to dream a little bigger, darling.
Say hello to my little friend.
We've seen video game violence go from the benign aggressions of Pac-Man, Space Invaders, and Asteroids to the unimaginable and hyper-realistic bloodbaths of today's games. And in a much more disturbing shift, we've seen porn culture go from the softcore sexism of Hugh Hefner's brand of hedonistic masculinity in the 1950s to the hardcore misogyny, anger, aggression, and sexualized brutality of the men featured in the gonzo porn that is so popular with guys today. But despite this ratcheting up of violent masculinity, over the past few years we've been hearing exactly the opposite claim being made. Not that men are too violent, but that they've gone soft.
The whole culture is being feminized, in my opinion.
There's a certain emasculation that's happening in our culture.
Part of the problem is we've sort of feminized schools.
I think she's right. It's 100%. We're wussifying America.
Is this the wussification of America?
Yes, this is one more step in the wussification of America.
Is this the latest in the wussification of America? Right back.
The heart of this argument is that men are in crisis because women, especially feminists and other forces of so-called political correctness, have been waging a full-scale war on traditional manhood.
We've been so emasculated by a so-called women's movement at this point. Even our strongest men are acting girly.
The founding fathers were men, not wussies. It's the wussification of America that's killing us.
Now, there's no doubt we're in the throes of some kind of a crisis in masculinity. There's rightfully been a lot of attention paid in recent years to how boys are lagging behind girls in our schools, how men are experiencing heightened job insecurity and alienation in the global economy, and how more and more men seem to be lost and acting out violently and self-destructively. But rather than questioning whether it's our inability to move beyond the straitjacket of traditional masculinity that might be the source of this crisis, across the cultural and political landscape there's been a growing movement to reclaim and reassert traditional manhood.
We need to toughen up and stand up for ourselves and learn to be a lot tougher than yoga's going to teach us to do all by ourselves.
From the recent avalanche of books and magazines celebrating throwback modes of manhood, to the wave of reality programs obsessed with the kind of manly physical labor that in real reality has been disappearing with America's manufacturing base over the past 3 or 4 decades.
Eat, sleep, carve. It's what we do. Whatever happened to men?
To the never-ending barrage of hyper-masculine sexist ads full of men obsessed with proving their manhood.
So keep the reality TV and lady drinks. We're good.
Dr. Pepper 10, it's not for women.
And shot through with borderline hysteria about the possibility of being perceived as feminine.
Light beer, please.
Sure. Do you care how it tastes?
Nah, I don't care how it tastes.
Okay, well, when you start caring, put down your purse and I'll give you a Miller Lite.
It's a carry-all.
No, it's not.
Man up.
There was no clearer depiction of this backlash phenomenon than the film Fight Club.
Like so many others, I had become a slave to the IKEA nesting instinct.
Yes, I'd like to order the Erica Picari dust ruffles.
The movie portrayed the emasculation of young men by the consumer culture.
We're still men. Yes, we're men. Men is what we are.
And offered up bare-knuckled violence as a way for men to reclaim their manhood. Regardless of whether we see this film as a glamorization or a satire of backlash masculinity, to a lot of young men it has served as a model of manhood, as backyard fight clubs have proliferated in the years since the film's release. We're witnessing a culture in retreat, a narrative that tells men that the best way to respond to change is not to adapt, but to reclaim traditional masculine control and dominance from the forces of feminization. And as it turns out, this is an old pattern in American history. As the scholar Jane Tompkins has shown, the Western dime novels of the late 1800s and early 1900s that helped create the romantic myth of the Wild West, burnishing the idea of a real man as a rugged individualist armed and ready to defend himself at a moment's notice, were themselves a direct response to women's challenges to men's dominance and control. According to Tompkins, it's no coincidence that Westerns became popular at the exact moment the frontier was closing, men's work was moving inside factory walls, and women were organizing a temperance movement to get men out of bars and force them to take responsibility for their families, and also beginning to agitate for their right to vote. The saloons and violence of the dime novels of the Old West provided an imaginary refuge for men who were threatened by a shifting economic landscape and the prospect of women's equality, a fantasy world that could help them shore up their increasingly anxious masculinity. And you see these same foundational anxieties at the heart of yet another iconic example of traditional masculinity, the Boy Scouts.
Boy Scouting is one of the few institutions to balance the rather softening effect of our modern way of life,
Which, for all its virtues as an organization, has made headlines in recent years for refusing to allow gay kids to become scouts.
A lot of people who don't want their kids to go camping, go out deep into the woods for days on end with guys who are avowed open gays.
The Boy Scouts are looked to with nostalgia today as a throwback to simpler, more traditional times, untouched by change and the forces of equality. But here again, the past turns out to be more complicated than it seems.
I will do my best to do my duty to God and the King.
It turns out that Lord Baden-Powell, a highly decorated officer in the British Army, founded the Boy Scouts as an organization of paramilitary socialization in 1908 for a very explicit reason: to counteract what he perceived as a decline in the manly virtues due to the growth of urban industrial culture the increase in women's education and calls for women's suffrage, and the emergence of homosexuality for the first time as a recognized category of human sexuality. In his influential book, Rovering to Success, A Guide to Young Manhood, Powell was quite explicit about this. God made men to be men, he wrote. Civilization, with its town life, buses, hot and cold water laid on, everything done for you, tends to make men soft and feckless beings. We badly need training for our lads if we are to keep up manliness in our race, instead of lapsing into a nation of soft, sloppy cigarette suckers. Building on and borrowing from Baden-Powell's ideas, the Boy Scouts of America was founded in 1910 for the same reason, to reassert traditional ideas of masculinity in the face of social change.
The Scout program is designed to help our sons, cousins, and younger brothers develop the initiative, the resourcefulness, the character, the quick thinking, and the leadership they really need in the somewhat jittery, insecure world in which we live.
Again and again at key moments in American history, you see men reacting to change in just this way by retreating into a hyper-masculine fantasy world. You see it in the rise of popular men's magazines in the 1940s, filled with stories about breathtaking manly adventures, sports, and sex. These magazines may look retro to us today, but what's important to remember is that they were just as retro in their own time. As the lives of men grew more sedentary during the consumer boom of the post-war years, as women moved into the workplace in unprecedented numbers and the women's movement gained traction, these magazines offered men a way to hit back at what Ralph Day, the editorial director of True Magazine, describes as the perils of creeping equality. Men were turning to his magazine in unprecedented numbers, Day explained to a group of men in a speech, because it stimulates his masculine ego at a time when man wants to fight back against women's efforts to usurp his traditional role as head of the family. In other words, these hypermasculine fantasies and images were explicitly designed to keep alive the traditional equation between masculinity, dominance, and control at a time of democratization and change. And this backlash has only accelerated exponentially since the 1960s, when the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the gay and lesbian equality movements, and the anti-war movement rose up to challenge traditional masculine authority like never before, especially the authority of straight white men. And these struggles unleashed a fierce cultural and political backlash that has sought to reassert the traditional order by reasserting traditional manhood. On the political front, no figure has been more important to this project of regressive national remasculinization than President Ronald Reagan. Reagan, a former Hollywood actor and matinee idol, rose to political power opposing all the progressive gains of the 1960s and 70s.
Plain truth of the matter is this has to stop, and it has to stop like the day before yesterday.
He led the fight against every major piece of civil rights legislation, the women's movement, the gay and lesbian liberation movements, and the student movement that opposed the war in Vietnam.
I was picked at a few days ago in California by some youngsters that had signs that said, "Make love, not war." Trouble is, they didn't look like they were capable of doing either. This fellow that was doing the talking had a haircut like Tarzan, he walked like Jane, and smelled like Cheetah.
And when he ran for president in 1980, he proved to be a master of political symbolism, tapping deep into the myth of the American cowboy, presenting himself as a throwback version of the strong, silent type riding into town to rescue a country emasculated by the equality movements of the 60s and the weak leadership of President Jimmy Carter. John Wayne wasn't available. Ronald Reagan was the next best thing. And the manly image of rugged individualism Reagan mobilized to turn people against the government and eviscerate the social safety net in the 1980s has been kept alive by his proud political heirs today.
Well, one of the objectives of the feminazis over the last 20, 25 years has been to dominate the public education system so as to remove the competitive nature of boys. There's a crisis of young man-boy education in the schools, and they did this on purpose to eliminate male competition in the workforce. This is part of feminazi grand plan.
Talk radio hosts like Rush Limbaugh wield huge influence in the American political culture, especially with white men who have been fleeing the Democratic Party in droves since the 1960s and voting Republican. And one of the primary ways he's achieved this success is by appealing to white men as victims of the feminist movement.
These kinds of women who have been attacking testosterone, who have been attacking traditional male roles, to whom the idea of a real guy is some metrosexual.
To the older working and middle-class white men who make up the bulk of Limbaugh's audience, the message is clear. The anxieties you're feeling have nothing to do with things like structural economic change or corporate greed or rising inequality. Your problems are somehow the result of women and people of color and gay people and liberals of all types undermining the country's values and taking away your manhood.
It's a bunch of metrosexuals. I mean, they're a bunch of guys, you wouldn't want one of them in a foxhole with you.
Rush Limbaugh, like so many of his colleagues in the right-wing talk radio universe, may have dodged the draft in Vietnam by claiming that an anal boil rendered him unfit for service. And he may have lived for years in the liberal epicenter of New York City in an $11 million penthouse apartment decorated like a 16th century French chateau, but all that matters is that he talks tough and plays a real man on the radio. But Limbaugh is just the most public face of an increasingly toxic strain of masculine paranoia and victimization.
You think you're a tough guy? Have me back with a boxing ring in here, and I'll wear red, white, and blue, and you can wear your Jolly Roger.
Okay. Talk radio hosts like Alex Jones have become heroes to their largely white male audiences by stoking fears of masculine dissolution.
The reason there's so many gay people now is because it's a chemical warfare operation. I have the government documents where they said they're going to encourage homosexuality with chemicals so that people don't have children. I even catch myself, Bob, drinking out of these estrogen mimickers. Because after you're done drinking your little juices, well, you're ready to go out and have a baby. You're ready to put makeup on. You're ready to wear a short skirt. You're ready to go, put together a garden of roses or something. You're ready to put lipstick on. Look at this.
And at the base of all of this is the belief that the best way for men to restore their dwindling manhood and restore order is through what the cultural historian Richard Slotkin has called the frontier myth of regenerative violence.
Most people understand that guns make you safer, especially because society is degenerating. There's going to be a lot of craziness going on. And so we need guns to protect ourselves.
What this shows is that a whole lot of men out there fear they're losing control and are convinced that violence might be the only way left for them to protect what's theirs.
The most powerful nation in the world, and I think it's crazy looking at all these armed Americans and our resolve in dealing with things and how, despite all that, there's still people crossing our borders. Why the hell are you people on the borders not firing at these people, shooting them, and dealing with them? That's the thing that gets me. If I lived on the border and some brown man came running through my backyard that looks like he didn't belong there, I'm going to fire some tracers at his ass. So why aren't people doing that?
The basic idea is that the best way to regain power and control is through a barrel of a gun, or as many guns as possible.
They're accurate. Mm-hmm. They are dependable. Yes, they are. Super dependable. They are extremely well made. You can carry plenty of them on your person at all times.
A recent study on gun ownership in America by the Institute of Medicine and the National Research Council made headlines when it found that there are somewhere around 300 million guns in America, or roughly 1 gun per citizen, as much as half of all the civilian-owned guns in the world. But what received less attention was that nearly 2/3 of these guns are owned by just 20% of the population, that older white men living in rural areas own most of these guns, and the number one reason for owning guns has shifted over the past few years from hunting and recreation to protection and self-defense.
Our leaders don't get it. And that's why you're going to need all the help you can get. That's why you need to be prepared.
This white male paranoia and siege mentality have fueled the increasingly aggressive effort to block even the most sensible gun policies.
When the system is overwhelmed, and I mean the system on the entire planet, somebody had better be prepared to protect themselves, their families, their neighborhoods, and the freedom of all mankind. Never let them take your Second Amendment right, ever.
This siege mentality has also fueled the rise of hate groups and militias over the past quarter century.
They're not branches of Al-Qaeda. They're right-wing extremists with lots of guns and an axe to grind against the U.S. government.
Listen, people. Things are bad. Things are real bad. And it's going to get a lot worse. So basically, you people need to wake up. Start buying some of these, see?
Groups like these are often described as white supremacist hate groups, which they usually are. But they can also be seen as a kind of reactionary men's movement, an organized expression of white male anxiety and aggrieved entitlement that relies on violence as the preferred means of attaining its goals.
Recovery crews are still searching the waters around an island where a gunman opened fire on young people attending a summer camp.
In recent years, perhaps the most disgusting and morally bankrupt expression of this kind of threatened entitlement was the massacre of 77 people, including 69 teenagers, perpetrated by the Norwegian right-wing fanatic Anders Breivik, a former customer service representative who had been declared unfit for service in the Norwegian army. In his 1,500-page manifesto explaining his reasons for the attack, Breivik ranted against Islam and multiculturalism, but he reserved special venom for feminism's role in emasculating Western men. According to Breivik, feminist ideology and political correctness have been responsible for transforming a patriarchy into a matriarchy and intend to deny the intrinsic worth of native Christian heterosexual males. And by now, men have been reduced to an emasculated, touchy-feely subspecies. But this isn't just about extremists who stockpile weapons. All too often, a similar logic is at work with a lot of the violence committed by ordinary guys.
Can you open this, please?
Oh, sure.
Thank you very much.
So, you like the bitches out there in the fucking old Russia there?
What?
The bitches in old Russia.
What the bitches?
The women. It's the fucking hoes, baby. The fucking girls. You fuck the shit out of them.
Yeah.
And then you never call them again.
Why you don't call them? Because they do not have a telephone, yes?
No, not because of that. They don't have my
Definitely not 'cause of
respect,
that.
you know? I mean...
Sacha Baron Cohen, who has emerged as a kind of pop-punk anthropologist for the study of amped-up and violent American masculinity, has used a series of ingenious disguises to infiltrate male subcultures and chronicle the sexism, misogyny, homophobia, and violence that so many ordinary men use to form bonds with one another and prove they're real men.
You guys ready to see a little ass kicking tonight? Make some noise, everybody. Put your hands together, make some noise. The host of the brand new TV show, Straight Dave's Man Slamming Max Out. Give it up for Straight Dave!
Cohen's tactics are ridiculous, funny, controversial, maybe even questionable at times. But like all great satirists, all he's really done is hold up a mirror to us. And that's exactly why this stuff can be so uncomfortable to watch.
Are you ready for some man-slamming action? Who's ready for an old-fashioned hetero fest? Let me hear you say straight pride. Straight pride. Straight pride. Straight pride. It's great to have an evening with straight people. It's great not to have any fags here. You're a faggot. Who called me a faggot? Whoever called me a faggot, come up here and I'll beat your ass.
We're used to seeing the glamorization of hypermasculine posturing. We're not nearly as used to thinking about the unglamorous, ugly, mean-spirited, and violent ways these images play out in the real world.
Wait a minute. Who wants to see me beat this fag's ass? Who wants me to beat this?
We laugh at this kind of behavior when it's presented out of context and given a kind of mocking attention by someone like Sacha Baron Cohen. But the reality is that violence often has less to do with guys stepping out of line than with guys towing the line and conforming to cultural norms.
Two-star high school football players in Steubenville, Ohio, have been found guilty of raping a West Virginia teenager.
Take the Steubenville, Ohio case, where two adolescent boys were convicted of raping a drunk and unconscious 16-year-old girl at a party. The boys were popular high school football players, and a number of kids shared pictures and video on social media of the passed-out girl during the course of the night.
How do you feel on a dead girl? Are you serious?
One video in particular, made the night of the rape by a group of guys in Steubenville, showed just how normalized this kind of sexism and misogyny have become in a lot of male peer cultures.
She's at least a 14. She's deader than a doornail.
For this guy and his friends, who had just witnessed or heard what had happened and weren't even sure if the young woman was alive, the whole thing was an occasion to bond and get some laughs with their buddies.
They raped her harder than that cop raped Marcellus Wallace in Pulp Fiction. They raped her quicker than Mike Tyson raped that one girl. She is so raped right now.
As sick as this seems, this case is just another example of something that sexual assault researchers have been saying for a long time. It doesn't matter whether it's at a party in Middle America, on a bus in New Delhi.
In India, the young woman gang raped on a New Delhi bus
has died.
Or even more brazenly in the public space of Tahrir Square in Cairo, Egypt. Gang rape is often an expression of a twisted kind of group ritual in male culture in which otherwise regular guys perform for and bond with each other by dehumanizing and abusing women, all in order to prove to their friends that they're real men. Other research has found that the more invested guys are in traditional ideas about manhood, the more likely they are to be homophobic.
Thousands of marchers hit the streets of New York to protest a string of attacks on gay men, including a murder. Marchers chanted and carried signs in memory of 32-year-old Mark Carson, who was shot and killed over the weekend.
The troubling rise in violent attacks on gay people demonstrates how way too many men of all racial and ethnic backgrounds take it upon themselves to serve as gender cops. Running through all of this is a stunning lack of empathy for anybody who isn't part of the boys' club. This lack of empathy was on full and disturbing display a few years back when news broke that homeless people around the country were being brutally attacked by groups of young men. Here again, the narrative was familiar.
Thomas, was that you on the videotape? Why would you beat up homeless people?
A bunch of seemingly normal young men somehow convinced themselves it would be a good idea and a good time to go out and beat up defenseless homeless men.
Chris had brought up a 2x4 with a nail through it and hit the guy on top of the head with it.
With the nail?
With the nail.
Why did you do all this?
I guess for fun.
What became clear later in interviews with some of the young men who were convicted of murder for these attacks was that the pain they inflicted on these men mattered a lot less at the time than the importance of having fun with the boys and bonding with their friends. When a 60 Minutes piece revealed that a lot of these cases were directly connected to a video series called Bum Fights, one of the most shocking things, again, was just how normal and funny it all seemed to the producer of these videos when questioned by Ed Bradley.
We showed this to McPherson.
What are you doing?
How do you defend that?
It's a skit.
It was like he had no idea what all the fuss was about.
You're sneaking up on them while they're asleep and assaulting them. It doesn't look like a skit. It doesn't say, hey, this is staged, this is acting.
Oh, no. I'm not saying it's staged. I'm saying that just the way it's set up, it's I don't know. I mean, the bum hunter is not an easy thing to defend, but
you're defending it.
Well, I'm trying to. It just, it's just hard to make sense of things when they're just so absurd. I mean, it's just so absurd. These guys tying up homeless people, and we're trying to defend the notion that we're responsible for the deaths of homeless people.
As easy as it is to vilify this one guy, and deservedly so, this producer made millions of dollars selling copies of these DVDs to a willing audience of young men.
Bum fights.
The key here with all of this is that this isn't just about deviant individuals. It's about the much more disturbing possibility that our social norms about manhood are implicated as well. And it's about how men too often turn to violence out of fear that they don't measure up to our rigid cultural codes of manhood. In his fascinating study of violence, the psychiatrist James Gilligan interviewed hundreds of violent criminals in American prisons and found that the single most powerful reason they turned to violence was because they felt shamed, humiliated, or disrespected as men. The more time I spent with him, Gilligan writes about one of the hundreds of violent criminals he has interviewed over the course of his research, the clearer it became that his character served as a defense against the threat of being treated with scorn and disrespect, of being perceived as a weakling, not a real man, someone who could be laughed at. We may not hear about it much in mainstream coverage of violence, but again and again we've seen exactly this dynamic. Young men using violence to overcome the shame of not being seen and respected as real men.
16-year-old Luke Woodham entered the commons area of Pearl High and fired off several shots.
Woodham opened fire at Pearl High School, killing 2 students.
Consider Luke Woodham, who carried out a school shooting in Pearl, Mississippi in the late 1990s. Woodham wrote a letter before he went on his rampage explaining himself this way: "I am not insane, I am angry. I killed because people like me are mistreated every day. All throughout my life, I was ridiculed, always beaten, always hated. If I can't do it through pacifism, if I can't show you through the displaying of intelligence, then I will do it with a bullet. Murder is not weak and slow-witted. Murder is gutsy and daring." And look at the Boston Marathon bombing. The mainstream discussion focused on the religious motivations of the bombers. But what was also clearly at work here was the fact that the bombing was masterminded by a young man in his 20s, a former boxer whose life hadn't turned out like he had planned, and who found in jihadist teachings a rationale for committing an act of redemptive violence.
Just minutes after firing 2 fatal shots at the Virginia Tech dormitory on Monday, Cho Sung-wi returned to his own dorm room and made the final preparations to mail what appears to be a video confession.
Or consider Sung-hee Cho, who committed one of the worst mass shootings in American history when he went on a shooting spree at Virginia Tech University in 2007, killing 32 people. Cho was a socially isolated, troubled young man with a history of mental health problems who had clearly bought into a cultural narrative that says the way to reclaim manhood is through projecting an image of menace and toughness, instilling fear in others, and using violence.
I didn't have to do this. I could have left. I could have fled. But now, I will no longer run.
Before he committed the Virginia Tech massacre, he wrote, produced, and starred in his own video, demonstrating how thoroughly he'd bought into this Hollywood script.
You had 100 billion chances in the ways to have avoided today, but you decided to spill my blood. You forced me into a corner and gave me only one option. The decision was yours. Now you have blood on your hands that will never wash off.
Cho isn't the only mass murderer whose violent actions enabled him to rewrite the script of his life in order to place himself back in the manly starring role.
And all you hear is like firecrackers, and then I looked out the window and there's a kid with a trench coat and a shotgun throwing pipe bombs in the parking lot.
The Columbine killers, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, left behind written diaries that provide insight into how their murder of 12 classmates and a teacher was part of a conscious strategy to settle scores. In his journal, Klebold writes that he and Harris will take revenge on society. And toward the end of his own journal, Harris writes, "Everyone is always making fun of me because of how I look, how fucking weak I am and shit. Well, I will get you all back. I hate people, and they better fucking fear me if they know what's good for them." Nothing can excuse the pathetic and cowardly way men like these use violence and destroy the lives of innocent people to make some kind of a statement. But we're kidding ourselves if we think these killings will stop unless and until we can identify and transform the larger cultural belief systems that underlie them.
From the mass shooting in Tucson aimed at former Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords to the Colorado movie theater massacre, killers in many recent mass killings suffered mental illness.
Of course, there's no question that mental illness has played a role in a lot of rampage killings and mass shootings. But what never seems to get discussed is why it is that somewhere around 98% of school shootings and rampage killings have been committed by men, even though there are plenty of young women who suffer from mental illness as well. What this tells us is that violence can't be reduced to mental illness on its own, especially since the vast majority of mentally ill people are not violent at all. The bottom line is that even young men who are mentally ill live and operate within a culture that has normalized violent masculinity and defined manhood in exceedingly narrow ways.
It's been widely reported school shooter Adam Lanza suffered some kind of personality disorder.
The Sandy Hook Elementary School shooter Adam Lanza may have been mentally ill, but he played out a familiar script.
He was bullied severely, brutally bullied when he was in elementary school at Sandy Hook.
By all accounts, he was a socially awkward boy who didn't fit in and appears to have been mercilessly bullied.
That's a clip of the video game Call of Duty. It's also the game that Adam Lanza used to play.
He spent countless hours playing war-themed video games. He developed a revenge fantasy, secured firearms, and then killed his own mother before carrying out one of the most brutal and ruthless mass killings in American history. He surely knew that slaughtering school children would send an unmistakable message to the world that he was in terrible pain. Rather than simply kill himself, he would make others suffer along with him, and in his own delusional and twisted way, he would recapture the sense of respect that seemed to have eluded him his whole life. The children of Newtown, like so many other innocent victims of men's violence, became theatrical props in the performance of an aggrieved, angry, and likely self-hating young man who absorbed all the wrong lessons about what it means to be a tough, strong man from the world around him. As uncomfortable as it may be for us to think about Lanza as anything but an unhinged lunatic, we need to confront the larger day-to-day cultural belief system about manhood that's a normal part of young men's lives. Just take a look at the ad campaign the Bushmaster Firearms Company ran prior to the Newtown massacre for the very AR-15 style semi-automatic rifle Lanza used during his killing spree. The takeaway from this isn't that ads like these made Adam Lanza violent. That's way too reductive and simplistic. Individual ads or movies or video games don't make guys go out and shoot people. The real takeaway is that we live in a culture that connects manhood to guns and a willingness to use violence at the deepest levels of men's identity. telling young men that violence, far from being the last resort for resolving disputes, is the first and preferred method of proving you're a man, especially when you're feeling your masculinity is under attack.
The shooter was 36-year-old Andrew Engeldinger, an employee of the small company who had recently lost his job.
And this isn't just about young men. Again and again, we've seen the same thing with older men who commit mass shootings.
A troubled ex-husband is under arrest in a Southern California hair salon shooting that left 8 people dead.
In case after case, these men have faced grief, bitter disappointment, and feelings of failure.
The shooter, Richard Farley, was obsessed with a female colleague. He had also been laid off.
They are either chronically unemployed, have been left by their wives or girlfriends, been fired from their jobs, or have suffered some other kind of serious blow to their self-worth as men. What all of this amounts to is that our violence problem seems to be a lot less about lone wolves and monsters who fail to conform to society's norms than it is about too many men, in a sense, over-conforming to our norms and ideals of manhood out of fear of not being seen as men. When we talk about men's violence and dominant ideals of violent masculinity, there's a temptation to frame things in terms of the damage men do to others. But we need to look also at the devastating harm these norms do to men themselves. This is certainly true of gun violence. Every year in this country, over 30,000 people are killed by guns, something like 85 per day. The vast majority of these victims are men, approximately 86%. But while we're used to thinking about gun violence in terms of mass shootings and urban crime, we really don't talk a lot about how most gun deaths are the result of men and boys shooting themselves. Suicide, which is really violence turned inward, accounts for close to 2/3 of all gun deaths. The vast majority of people who kill themselves with a gun are men, and white men comprise over 80% of these firearm suicides. Violence doesn't just leave physical scars, it also leaves emotional scars. Look at the cost to African American boys and young men of living in and around violence. Violence is the leading cause of death of African American men between the ages of 15 and 30. But they also have much higher than average rates of depression, school dropout, mental health problems linked to perpetual stress, substance abuse. And just look at the terrible toll violence has taken on the psyches of men and women who serve in combat zones.
In the 5 years between 2006 and 2009, more than 1,100 members of the armed services took their own lives.
Something like half of U.S. service members who have done tours in Iraq and Afghanistan have symptoms of PTSD. And we see the same thing when it comes to Vietnam. In addition to the 58,000 American men who lost their lives there and the more than 300,000 who were wounded, millions of men who came home from that war showed signs of trauma, depression, flashbacks, alcohol and drug problems. They also had to contend with a masculine ethos that told men to suck it up and deal with it. In fact, many more Vietnam veterans have committed suicide since the war ended than were killed during the war itself. In her landmark study, Trauma and Recovery, Judith Herman draws a powerful connection between the experience of male combat veterans and women who are the victims of domestic and sexual violence. The sources of the violence and their context might vary, but the unifying theme is that human beings, young and old, women and men, suffer when their physical and sexual boundaries are violated. But in the case of men, this pain gets compounded by a cultural belief system that equates manhood with invulnerability and ridicules and shames men who admit to being in emotional pain. In his classic work, I Don't Want to Talk About It, the therapist Terry Real identifies the widespread phenomenon of what he calls covert depression, a condition that roughly 3/4 of American men suffer in silence out of fear of seeming like less than a real man. For many of these men, childhood trauma and other experiences of violence play a role in this depression, which then can affect not only their ability to take care of themselves physically and emotionally, but also hinder their ability to sustain healthy relationships in adult life. Despite predictable arguments that equate trying to understand or prevent violence with weakness, the bottom line is that we have to have the strength to ask these kind of questions if we want to move beyond the never-ending cycle of violence. And that starts with examining the dominant stories we tell ourselves as a culture about manhood and violence, and demanding more honest and accurate representations of the personal and societal consequences of violent masculinity. In recent years, we've seen important examples of just this. War movies like Saving Private Ryan showed not only the awe-inspiring courage of the men who stormed the beaches in Normandy and fought totalitarianism during World War II. The film also captured the panic, anxiety, and sheer terror of the young men who experienced that war.
There's too many locks. There's too many. I can't do it. I can't get it off. I'm sorry, okay? You understand? I'm sorry.
More recently, the Hurt Locker explored another devastating effect of battlefield trauma.
Get down now!
Showing how the intensity and violence of war make it difficult for many veterans to adjust back to civilian life. And we saw the same kind of honest and tragic portrayal of dominant masculinity in the film The Wrestler, starring Mickey Rourke as an over-the-hill professional wrestler whose body was ravaged by physical injury and who was so emotionally damaged by violence that he couldn't imagine life outside the glamour of the arena.
My heart's still ticking.
Yeah, but the doctor
Listen,
said...
I know what I'm doing. You know, the only place I get hurt is out there. The world don't give a shit about me. You hear them? This is where I belong. I gotta go.
No.
Similarly, intensely realistic shows like HBO's The Wire have refused to glamorize urban street life and violent crime, directly confronting the costs young men of color too often pay for their investment in the idea that respect comes only at the business end of a Glock.
Come on. Wetting your fucking pants like you a little boy. Be a man. Stand up like a motherfucking man. My thing is, man, you said you was a fucking man. Stand up straight. That's us, man. Do it, goddammit, if you're gonna.
And we've seen emotionally complex shows like The Sopranos, which centered on brutal mob boss Tony Soprano, a ruthless killer who intimidated everyone around him.
Want to just calm down and be perfectly calm. We can talk about whatever's bothering you. Yeah. Tony, this is crazy.
But also portrayed him as a deeply troubled man who had recurring panic attacks and who had to battle his own anxiety and self-doubt when he turned to a woman therapist for help.
Whatever happened to Gary Cooper? The strong, silent type. That was an American. He wasn't in touch with his feelings. He just did what he had to do. See what they didn't know was once they got Gary Cooper in touch with his feelings, that they wouldn't be able to shut him up. And then it's dysfunction this, and dysfunction that, and dysfunction motherfucker.
And then there's Good Will Hunting, which catapulted Matt Damon to fame, with Damon playing the role of an intellectually gifted working-class tough guy who relieves the trauma of his abusive childhood by hardening himself to the world and fighting anyone who challenges him.
Come on, it's me. It's me, Will. Remember we went to kindergarten together.
And who then, with the support of a woman who loves him and a therapist he comes to trust, finds the courage to battle through his defenses, look inside himself, and let go of his bottled-up rage.
It's not your fault. I know. It's not your fault. All right? It's not your fault. It's not your fault. Don't fuck with me. It's not your fault. Don't fuck with me, all right? Don't fuck with me, Sean. Not you. It's not your fault.
This is an incredibly powerful illustration of the kind of courage it takes for men to break through the defensive shield of the tough guys and become better men. After the Newtown massacre, there was a lot of tough guy talk about how the cure for our violence problem is yet more violence.
The only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun.
But there were other men who spoke in the wake of Newtown as well. Men like Neil Heslin, whose 6-year-old son Jesse was among the 20 children gunned down that tragic day.
He was my son, he was my buddy, he was my best friend.
What was so important about his testimony was that he went beyond expressing grief for his son and directly challenged the culture of violence.
We're not living in the Wild West. We're not a third world nation. We have the strongest military in the world. We don't need to defend our homes with weapons like that. And I just hope that everybody in this room, as I said before, can support change.
This was an act of courage in a culture that so often romanticizes violent masculinity and silences the voices of men who don't buy into these myths. Too often we define masculine strength by who can blow away the most people, who can flex the most muscle, who can impose their will and inflict the most damage. But this cheapens the real definition of strength and toughness. We respect the toughness of firefighters who rush into burning buildings when others are rushing out, police officers and other first responders who put their lives on the line, and our men and women in the armed services who show courage under fire, not because they're out to prove something, but because they steel themselves in the face of danger and face down their fears in service to others. For the same reason, we should respect the toughness and strength of men who challenge the myth that being a real man requires putting up a false front, disrespecting others, and engaging in violent and self-destructive behavior. We should respect all the men out there who aren't threatened by women's equality, who have the confidence to listen to women, learn from them, and grow in the process, who refuse to engage in homophobic abuse and bullying to prove they're one of the guys, who show empathy for others rather than joining in or remaining silent when other guys prop themselves up at the expense of others, and who meet change and difference with a willingness to make change and a difference themselves. Strength is about adapting to change, not about retreating from it and lashing back with violence out of fear. And it's high time we had a definition of manhood capable of meeting that challenge.
All right, now's a good time to practice those breaths again. It's a lot of information. Yeah. So I think for time's sake, we'll just maybe pose some of the questions that we were gonna go through.
Yeah. Should we hand them out just so that they have them?
Well, we don't have copies for them now. Because we're gonna do the groups.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were gonna have you do groups. We could do tables though. Tables, wanna look at them.
Those little tough guys,
Tough guys.
GUIs, it was like a number 2 or something?
Yeah.
Guys too.
So just some things to think about. So we'd like to get to introducing violence too before we leave today. Oh. We're good? Right here. Oh. Totally missed the table. So the first one is, after viewing Tough Guys 2, where do you think your views and opinions of masculinity and men have formed or come from? Did it make any of you think about that?
Media, they didn't, parents and babysitters, society, school.
Did you say?
From government.
What was the last thing you said? Before
School,
society,
parents, society.
Politicians.
Politicians, okay.
History, like historical.
Yeah.
Bible even.
Yeah, you definitely would, could see the impact of John Wayne and those kind of movies on the young guys.
Yeah.
There's a whole field now called epigenomics. And so just like we've, basically the genes been able to basically come up with who are we, the DNA and everything else. So now looking at epigenomics is actually the atmosphere, the mental and emotional atmosphere that actually has an impact on those genes. And I think what we're seeing, if you look at what when we came over here, what we did to the First Nation, the natives that were here, the Indians, more brutal than we just watched right there. If you read history of Black Elk or Pretty Well Heard of Wounded Knee or anything about it, mounting Gatling guns on railroad cars and going out and killing 32 million buffalo. We basically came in and desecrated everything that was natural in this country, everything. That's with us right now. And it's not like that's gone away.
Yeah.
This type of behavior is a culture, so it's a physical thing, emotional thing, but there is literally, to me, the only way to address any of it is through consciousness. Somehow we have to become aware and recognize what we're capable of doing, and then own it, and then basically heal it. But so much of all of this type of behavior is it's still being expressed today, and we see it.
And that comes back to Jessica mentioned earlier, like the power and privilege. So a lot of this consciousness can happen in certain places in our society, right? And some people don't have the opportunity to have those avenues to receive education, to have discussion, to have mental health, all those kinds of things that could help strengthen that consciousness too.
The school system it idolizes the war and how America started, my country similar. And my daughter is like they don't talk about all the people that got killed and the emotional repercussions of it. It's still not taught to this day in school. It's like, cool, we took all this, and like, yeah, but those dead people had feeling, you know, that's ignored because then you can't glorify war. And even the military in America being the biggest in the world, and like, why is this country proud of that? It really doesn't make sense. It's just weird.
Like, we teach the history of violence that we perpetuated.
And then we have the biggest violence machine. How's that good?
And it makes me think of an article that I read the other day about how Trump is asking to have the military parade come back.
Yes.
And how in like North Korea that's a huge thing, and in different countries, and how they've shied away for it. And that it just makes me like just shake my head sometimes because it's like that's so unnecessary, and it's just proving a point of furthering violence. Why else would you parade a military?
Because it shows how masculine he is.
Yeah, and like with, none of this is on accident, right? That's like when me watching this whole video, it's like the issue is masculinity and violence and everything, but it's like there's a whole there's a whole another layer. It's like it's a controlled system. It's created that way 100% intentionally. There's division created, and then I mean the whole gun issue is so like, yeah, it's definitely
big time profit in violence. I mean, it is one of the biggest industries in the country, if not the world. I mean, Eisenhower said in his last speech to Congress in 1959-60, he said, "Beware the military-industrial complex." That's what we've become. It is the biggest business, and unfortunately, the United States are the purveyors of that. That's where we make our money. So, and men, of course, are the ones that typically do it, although now more and more women are going to it. So I really believe it really requires a change of consciousness, and that's why I'm very hopeful that to the degree that women really actually move in and take absolutely the power and have the equality in the level of Congress, for instance. There's 595 people there, and only 19% are women. It needs to be 50.3% because 50.3% of our population is female. It's more than the number of males. Once it balances out, so if you look at the whole, Chinese thing of yin and yang, I mean, men have this yang energy, very aggressive, very downward pushing, and women are more expansive, more nurturing, and bring a different component. So together, there's a way to overcome them. So I'm hopeful that a lot of stuff we're seeing, I mean, I was telling Greta last night, I mean, to me it's funny, I mean, not funny, but Trump is like a human animal. I mean, he's literally bringing out all of the shit right there for everybody to see. And, and anything on its way up is on its way out. And so basically you have to be able to look at that, and to the degree that this can be addressed, and I think it is. We're seeing more women file to run for offices now, this November election, more than any time in history. So I think it's really created a major catalyst and a movement. And I think there's a lot of men obviously supporting women to do that in every way also. That's the only way this is going to change. It's an awful lot to overcome. And honestly, if you look at the history of Homo sapiens, I wish I could say that we were the first ones, but it's pretty clear for about the last 150, 160,000 years, we have not been very kind to one another. So until we can kind of find the peace inside, you can't overcome the violence out there with more violence. You just can't do it. So,
but if it's escalating, like in this, watching that, what men need is not more violence. And so also, if men speak up more too of what they actually need and want and desire, then we can serve them better too, because it's like, okay, well, we'll fight more to get what we want, and we still don't have what we want, so we're going to fight again. It's like coming back, and the whole thing of teaching the males to be violent. When you think of young children, they have to be taught this from watching that. So it's not in them. It's just like,
but it is because their ancestors were in wars.
Totally, and it's not, maybe they're not like throwing left hooks and punches, but as soon as you're 2 years old, you grab and start to wrestle. It's natural. Like,
but girls do stuff too. It's like, we express.
But yeah, we definitely would play physically.
Girls punch. Girls do too. It's not just.
So I'm saying
But then when does
the
it
media
change?
is like the biggest issue in the whole subject to me.
Maybe like
the
it's
entertainment industry, though, not just the news. It's like that
All of it,
crime
yeah.
is entertaining.
And there's plenty of men
How many
who aren't
CSIs are
violent,
there?
who find other ways if they want to punch something. Like, so saying that men are violent disrespects all the men that are not. Like, what? I'm a homo, homo sapien.
And I don't know the science on if boys and men are innately more violent or not, but I think about from day one how a boy is interacted with by his parents and a girl is interacted with by her parents is very different. A boy's going to be played with rougher, where a girl's going to be more coddled and that kind of thing. So I think there's a lot of reinforcements, whether we're
right, and
whether
when you're
we're
a girl
innately-
and you're biting, you're kicking, you're doing all that, like it's explicit. Like, no, you're a girl. You're not supposed to act like that.
Yeah.
Boys, yeah, go for it.
This just ties in real quick to my work with feng shui. Is like, you can have a reputation in your head, but what other people perceive of you is your reputation, actually, not what you think you are about. It's really the feedback that you get from other people. So depicting, minority groups, highlighting it on the news, in movies, all that stuff is contributing to their environment and what people are telling them that they are. So, that is kind of their box construct is, this highlight reel of violence that we just watched that was really lengthy. There's a lot there. So it's a really hard thing to break for them. Like you were saying, the power and privilege, and they're ignorant to the system. Their ignorance is what is the problem. And so I don't.
It's very cyclical if you think about it, right? Because it's being portrayed and they reinforce it, and they being whoever the group is that we're talking about, it's being stereotyped, but it goes around and around. So what about men or boys using a pose or performance to kind of live up to masculinity? How do the men in the room feel, or how do the women feel or see that in people, boys and men in their lives?
I did it till I was like 13 or 14 for sure.
So you felt a stronger pressure for that?
Totally, you gotta,
you're
like, especially like, you play sports, you're on teams, you know what I'm saying? It's like you're expected to act a certain way, perform a certain way, talk to girls a certain way, be the man, not be the man, hang out in certain spots with certain people, Until it's like, that's why, like, the biggest thing you can give anybody, and all this, like, it's hard in like a traumatic situation when people are coming from, like, actually experiencing the violence, but before they experience the violence, and if you're just like, it's really teaching kids, mostly for me, like, I want to work with the children, is like, think for yourself. Like, literally, it doesn't matter what, it's hard, but like, to be the coolest thing you can do is what you actually want to do, and act the way you want to act, takes a while.
Yeah.
Especially, so peer pressure, and then, being able to stand up for what you believe in without being violent, like your word being more than, So I think all boys go through it.
Yeah. Any other thoughts?
Well, it's changed a lot too. It was interesting depicting, for instance, the Batman from the 50s. I mean, I grew up in the 50s and a little bit in the 60s, and it really was it's so much more intense now. And really most of the, getting in fights out by the bikes outside of school is pretty benign. It was usually one or two punches or rustling and a bunch of people cheering. What really wasn't nearly as aggressive or as violent as it is now. And I think to a large degree the expansion through the media and whatnot is really, and I think to a certain degree to break down the nuclear family, very high divorce rates, and really, having confusion in regards to identification, who you are. It has really caused all of this to explode, which is where we are right now.
Kind of going off what you said, how much more explosive things have gotten. Well, like, I don't know, this video really hit home for me. My hometown was on there at least 4 times. Like, places like that streets that I used to drive down and stuff. And the one video of all the middle school girls beating the hell out of each other. Like, I don't even know how to describe it. Like, if you are somehow pulled into a fight like that in Baltimore City, you better fight. Or else you might get killed. Right. And like, the environment is so incredibly volatile, like on certain blocks, not everywhere, but majority of the city, people don't really have any other option other than to be like that. You're taught to be incredibly violent as like a 2 or 3 year old there, and if you're not, you're gonna get your ass kicked or you're gonna get killed along the way. And I don't know, it's just it's sad. And from what you were saying earlier about I don't know, you said something that made me think of the fact that if you're raised as a young child in that type of environment, you're constantly in fight or flight. Consistently. So by the time you're a teenager or an adult, your body does not know how to chill, like physically. Something happens, you get amped to react, and like, you know. So I'm not saying it's okay or anything. I'm just saying the problem is so ingrained in certain places and inner cities in our country. It's just like it's just a tragedy.
I was just going to say that violence for women, stereotypical definition of men leaves women like in fear, basically, because they have to hide from it or not provoke it or deal with the fallout, or they just yes, well, not that they're at fault, but they just have to pick up the pieces and move on, or I like Good Will Hunting. A good therapist and a good woman can maybe help a man heal, but getting to every single one is there's barriers. There's protective barriers to keep that construct going, because self-destruction is profitable for somebody.
Yeah, so by no means are all men violent, but looking at violence and masculinity it's a lot to think about, and it really makes you look at the layers, the roots, all those things that you guys brought up. Any other comments about the video?
It seems really difficult for men to be like men in the good way when all of this is Adam. It's like we have all this women's stuff that's great, but dudes, the men are getting crushed because they're just getting madder and madder and madder because they're not being heard. And our culture and us women don't allow it. It's like, if we could shift it a little bit, even as parents, like, don't tell your little boy when he's crying to man up. Just say, yes, you need a hug. If your husband looks emotional or whatever, say, yeah, have a hug. It's like, but it seems so difficult as a man to just be the provider and be the man that he wants to be when all this is at him.
The aggressors are just as much victims as
the boy. I didn't want to say one of the boys that did the school shooting, and he said, kindness and intelligence and all those things that he tried, he didn't work, and he resorted to violence. And to me, that's really sad. Like tearing up right now. But yeah, like we got to get to people, from the beginning. And that's what we're trying to do, I guess, in our work. Yeah. I think that's all we're gonna have time for. So on Monday, is that your next class? Yeah. It's such a different schedule for us. So normally we would cover what we did tonight and on Monday all in one night. But Monday you'll start fresh with going right into intimate partner violence, the definition, and moving on from there. So thank you all for your participation tonight and your deep thoughts and all that kind of thing, and definitely do some self-care tonight and and have a great weekend and all that kind of thing. You're welcome. Self-care. Self-care. It's gonna be some self-care. Oh,
This is
this is it. Yeah. Thank you guys. Bringing up the awareness. Putting it in people's
It's not
faces.
Holly for everyone, I think.
Yeah.
If you guys haven't filled these out and given back to me, can you please before you leave?
No,
Do you want these?